Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all participants online and here at the Maison de la Poste in Turn and Taxis for this conference, Back to the Nature. We organized this conference in a very special context, as the COP26 is taking place in Glasgow. As we speak, we will discuss today the impact of climate change on water and review the potential of nature-based solutions to face the changing climate and support sustainable management of water resources. We are delighted to welcome a wide range of speakers that will share with us their perspective on the matter, including political, economic, environmental, and operational aspects. Before we open the floor for our sessions, I would like to welcome on stage the first alderman of the city of Brussels, Mr. Benoit Hellings, in charge of climate and sports, to share with us his view on local policies for climate and the Brussels context. Benoit Hellings is in charge, as I said, of climate and sports, and he led the Green Party Ecololist during the 2018 municipal elections. Prior to his current role, Mr. Hellings was a member of the Federal Parliament of Belgium as representative and as senator. Benoit, you have the floor. Please come in.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Brussels. I'm so happy to see you in flesh and to see you online, so welcome to Brussels. Welcome to the capital city of a country which has known the first wave of climate refugees of the continent last summer. Yes, we have to cope with that, and that's what we had to cope this summer, like other colleagues in Germany. We need to answer this question. We need to act quickly on the climate change at the local level, and we can do it straightforward. People are suffering from the impact of climate change already today. That's something we didn't know some years ago. The front line to solve people's concerns is the municipality. It's also up to the municipalities to help their citizens to mitigate climate change and to adapt on its effects. That's what you are talking about today. Brussels has been hit by floods many times in the past, and it becomes more and more frequent over the last year. 3 districts were especially hit, and you see them there. It's up in the north for people who don't know Brussels. How can we do that? We have 3 different issues. First of all, flood issues. We have known disasters, natural disaster, not as strong as people has known in the south of the country or in Germany, but we have known that recently in August 2020 and June 2021. And a big part of the city is at risk of flooding. We have an environmental issue. The city sewage network was not designed and built to cope with so much water, and the huge amount of water are growing up. And we have an economic issue because rainwater goes in the sewage network like a lot in a lot of cities in Europe, and we have to treat it at the cost of €1.70 by cubic meters. But we can act and we can do something. First of all, we can prevent sewage network congestion to fight against flooding, pollution, and cost. We have a lot of solutions, but we are working on, first of all, public space management. We have to transform, and we transform impermeable space like road, car parks into permeable spaces. We make sure that parks and gardens deliver on water retention expectation, like for example, this square. the square level. We can act with the people of Brussels, the residents. We subsidize a program to help people to better manage the rainwater in their own house. We have 4 subsidies, for example, a subsidy for rainwater infiltration systems into the ground, water tank, and we have the third one for solution to increase permeability of terrace and gardens, and green roofs. And we help people and to get systems to custom-made analysis by a non-profit organization, which goes to the people home. I've seen from my own, I've done it myself, and advise them what's the best way to cope with these rainwater problems. And we work also with private stakeholders. For example, in this area up in the north, we we collaborate with 4 private stakeholders with huge top roofs. For example, we found 400,000 square meters of impermeable
Recording in
space.
progress.
Yes, it's recording. Be careful. And we worked with them, with these 4 private stakeholders, to disconnect their water discharge system to the sewage network. It's important because when we have all this global water, we can say to the people back up in the south of this area, we are working up in the north with major stakeholders, then they can keep the water, and so you don't have this water climbing down to the part where you live. We have to work also on the sustainable consumption of public buildings and public service, because we are, as a city, an example for the citizens and the public and the private sector. We have 3 swimming pools, a stadium, for example, and we have parks and gardens. We have to work on these topics first to give the good example. For example, we get the water from the swimming pool, and we use this water that we have to put in the sewage system to clean the city. That's a new project. We decided that yesterday. It's more than 30 liters by swimmer by day. So it's a huge amount of water that we can take back. First, secondly, we use water from the construction site. Like, for example, today, we are building a new school in the city center, in the narrow city center, Rue de la Seine, and we use I don't know the name in English, but we use the water coming from the ground, and that used to go to the sewage system, to use it to clean the city or to give water to plants in summer. 3, we reuse the shower water for the toilet of the streets department. So, for example, we get this water back. It's done. It's already done. And last system, we reuse rainwater for the stadium law, for those. It's not done yet, but we are working on it, because the Red Devils, and you know, football is very important in Belgium. And we are working on a project to get the water from the roof of the stadium to give water to the field. So it's time to act. We have a lot to do, but we can act now. So let's go. Have a good day here in Brussels, and good work. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Benoit. I already noticed many innovative actions that we can do as municipalities, and we will certainly go further this morning with all those topics. I would like to introduce now Jovana Goshkovic, which is who will make the animation of this session. Giovanna, you have the floor. Please, come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Van Nuffel. Thank you very much, Mr. Hellings, for your introductory note. Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's very nice to see people in person for the first time in 2 years. And hello, everybody online. Just a first very quick logistics practical note. If you're following us online, you should have a chat box available. If you have any questions that you would like to address to the speakers, please write it there and we will transfer it to the speakers. So after this very good introduction notes and the final word that we have to act and we can act, I will like to give the floor to our next speakers who will give us a little bit of the scientific background so that we have the information, we have the data to take the appropriate action. For the scientific part, it's important that we have solid information, and for this, the work that's been carried out at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at the international level is one of the best sources we have, which is why we're very happy to have online Mr. Hervé Douville, who was the coordinating lead author of the Chapter 8 on water cycle changes of the 6th assessment report of the IPCC's first working group. He has been conducting research in climate science for nearly 30 years at Météo France, and his activities focus on the understanding, modeling, and quantifying recent and future climate changes and associated uncertainties. Mr. Hervé Douville will join us online, and I'm very happy to give him the floor. Mr.
Thanks.
Douville.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to highlight some key findings of the Working Group 1 contribution to the latest IPCC report. So as an introduction, and before focusing on water cycle changes, sorry, I can change the slide. Is it my presentation that is now on board? Oh, okay, it works. So as an introduction, I would like first to remind you that it is now an established fact that human influence has warmed the climate by more than 1 degree Celsius over recent decades compared to the late 19th century. And this warming is entirely due to the human influence, with the greenhouse gas contribution partly offset by air pollution, which has a cooling effect. The IR6 has explored a set of 5 illustrative emission scenario ranging from very low to very high emissions. And from a physical perspective, it shows us that global warming can stay below 2 degrees C by the end of this century, at least if we implement immediate, drastic and sustained reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. It should be also emphasized that for the first time in the IPCC history, the global projection of surface air temperature have been constrained by the projected temperature, have been constrained by the observed global warming, while unfortunately it is still not possible to use the observation to constrain the water cycle response because it's much more tricky. There is much more internal variability within the water cycle. The IR6 also reaffirms that there is a qualinear relationship between our cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases and the global mean increase in surface air temperature, which implies that if we want to stop global warming, we will need to reach net zero emissions, and which also implies that we don't have much time to limit global warming well below 2 degrees C. The remaining carbon budgets that have been estimated are consistent with former estimates, and for instance, suggest that we have only 5 gigatons of future CO2 emissions in front of us. That is less than 1/5 of what we have emitted so far, if we would like to have 50% chance of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. So moving to chapter 8 and the water cycle, why should we expect water cycle changes? The first reason is that the water cycle is coupled to the atmospheric energy budget, so that any radiative change due to greenhouse gases emissions or emissions of air pollutant, what we call anthropogenic aerosols, will have fast consequences on precipitation. The second reason is that the atmospheric water cycle is coupled to the global ocean, whose human-induced warming will lead to a gradual increase in surface evaporation and total precipitation, so that it will lead to an overall intensification of the global water cycle. Moreover, other human activities, such as changes in land use and land cover, or also the increasing water use, can also have both direct and climate-mediated impact on the water cycle, especially at the regional scale. So beyond multiple drivers and timescales, key processes include both thermodynamics and large-scale dynamics. For instance, physical principles tell us that the atmospheric water holding capacity increases by about 7% per degree Celsius of global warming, which implies a similar increase in the magnitude of heavy precipitation intensities. A warmer atmosphere will see an increase in moisture transport, which on average will make wet seasons and events even wetter. And greater warming over lands and ocean can drive an increase in the atmospheric evaporative demand and therefore an increase in aridity. Finally, global warming can also change the atmospheric circulation patterns. For instance, will lead to a narrowing and strengthening of the tropical rain belt or to a poleward shift of the mid-latitude storm tracks. So now moving to the water cycle, to the observed water cycle changes, a first key finding is a stronger assessment that our anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases and aerosols have been associated with distinct fingerprints, spatial fingerprints of temperature at the top, precipitation in the middle, and aridity in the bottom panels across the 20th century. The ongoing greenhouse gas-induced global warming on the left is associated with contrasted precipitation patterns, but with an overall increase in aridity over many land areas. While the time-evolving emissions of anthropogenic aerosols, mostly from the northern hemisphere, are associated with an interhemispheric temperature response, a southward shift of the tropical rain belt, and have counteracted the aridity response to greenhouse gases emissions, at least in the northern mid-latitudes. In addition, there is evidence of observed changes in extremes, and this evidence has strengthened since the former report, including for heavy precipitation and droughts. There is more and more evidence that human-induced climate change is responsible for changes in extremes in every region across the globe, as highlighted, for instance, by singular attribution studies, which have clearly highlighted that recent extreme events have been made more likely than they would have been without human influence. And so this is true, for instance, for heavy precipitation events whose intensity and frequency have increased since the mid-20th century in almost all regions where we have enough observation and observation of sufficient quality. But we still need more work and more data to explore such changes in other regions that are shown, for instance, in gray in this map. And similarly, we do see some increase in aridity in drought, ecological and agricultural drought in this case, so mostly based on soil moisture deficits in a number of regions, but the signal is maybe less clear on the global scale due to the possible counteracting effect of increasing precipitation in some regions, which may have partly masked the effect of enhanced land surface evapotranspiration. Finally, recent satellite data, such as the gravimetric measurements from the GRACE missions, highlight that regional changes in terrestrial water storage, including groundwater depletion or surface water reduction in areas with intense irrigation, for instance, around the Aral Sea, which was one of the greatest world lakes in the 50s and which has almost vanished over recent decades. So moving now to projected water cycle changes, a first key finding is that, not surprisingly, many changes in the global water cycle will become larger in direct relation to increasing global warming. And this is true, for instance, here for annual mean precipitation, which changes are shown for 3 global warming levels, 1.5, 2, and 4 degrees C, respectively. But this is also true for most wet and dry extremes. And for instance, daily precipitation extremes that occurred only once per decade in the late 19th century will see their frequency doubled and their intensity increased by more than 14% in a +2 degree global warming level. Beyond precipitation changes, most scenarios, including the intermediate emission scenario shown here, the SSP2 scenario, highlight an overall increase in global land surface evapotranspiration, as well as an overall decrease in surface soil moisture in many regions, while relative changes in annual mean runoff here show similar but exacerbated patterns compared to precipitation changes on the top. And finally, if we plot relative changes in annual mean precipitable water, that is the atmospheric water column in black, precipitation in blue, or runoff in brown, as a function of increasing global warming, and it is here average over tropical land areas, we clearly see an overall intensification of the global water cycle. But as expected from the global energy constraints that I discussed earlier, the increase in global mean precipitation is much less than the increase in precipitable water, which is close to the Clausius-Clapeyron rate of 7% increase per degree C. And interestingly, we see that increase in year-to-year variability in dashed line is stronger than the increase in mean fluxes for both precipitation and runoff, which highlight a stronger volatility of water resources in a future warmer climate. So all these findings are quite robust, and they are based on multiple lines of evidence and multiple generations of global climate models, but there are still limits for projecting water cycle changes whose quantitative assessment remains uncertain and cannot exclude the potential for abrupt change. If, for instance, we mix all available CMIP6 models and all SSP scenarios, emission scenarios, the total uncertainty here in the annual mean precipitation response is made of three main contributions: internal variability, model uncertainty, and scenario uncertainty, whose relative importance depends here on the selected time horizon. For instance, in the near term, total uncertainty is dominated by both internal variability and model response uncertainty, while the precipitation response is not very sensitive to the emission scenario, which highlights the urgent need for a careful adaptation. In the mid to longer term, the contribution of internal variability vanishes, but uncertainties are still dominated by the model response, highlighting that both mitigation and adaptation strategies should consider the full range, or at least the likely range, of model outcomes. Similar conclusions can be drawn from relative changes in annual mean runoff, here average over 9 large-scale river basins, with most basins showing a wide range in their 90% confidence interval in their response, and some basins even suggesting that the ensemble mean forced response, shown here as solid lines, is not a fully linear function of the increasing global warming level. So there can be some non-linearities, and such non-linearities can arise, for instance, from land surface feedbacks and related tipping point, but they can also arise from changes in ocean circulation, as illustrated here by the annual mean precipitation that has arisen in the past on the left, or could arise in the future on the right, from a collapse of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. And the report clearly states that there is medium confidence that the hammock will not collapse before the end of this century, but should it collapse, and we cannot exclude this possibility, at least beyond the 21st century, it is very likely that there would be abrupt changes in the water cycle, including over Western and Southern Europe, where there would be a substantial drying and decrease in annual mean precipitation. So I would like to conclude with some implication for adaptation and mitigation. You know that Working Group 2 will soon release its own report with a water chapter as well. And probably they will remind us that half of the world population already experiences severe water scarcity for at least 1 month per year, and that adaptation to water-related hazards represent about 60% of current adaptation responses. But the WG1 key take-home message is that such hazards will be exacerbated with further global warming, and thus stronger at warming above 1.5 degrees. And this is true for both wet and dry events in many regions. So that careful adaptation responses are needed, not only to avoid the most adverse impact, hydrological impact of climate change, but also to avoid maladaptation and the lack of co-benefits for mitigation. And finally, we can say that water is relevant for all dimensions of climate change policies, since, for instance, land-based mitigation options that are necessary to fulfill the promise of the Paris Agreement to stay well below 2 degrees C global warming levels may have considerable footprints, whatever they are, bioenergy and capture storage, and carbon and capture storage, for instance, or afforestation and reforestation in other areas, and so that they will also need to be managed carefully. Thank you for your attention. Any question?
Yes, if we have any burning questions for Mr. Deauville in the room or online, please let us know. No? All right, then I suggest that we continue with the program, and then if there are more questions, we will have a Q&A session in any case. So thank you, Mr. Deauville, for this very interesting presentation on the scale of the issue and the forecast of the impact of climate change on water and water resources. Now that we've seen this, we can talk about what actions need to be taken at different levels. And we will start with our first presentation in the European level. I will ask Mr. Willem-Jan Goossen to come join me here. He currently works in the Climate Adaptation Unit of the European Commission's Directorate General Climate Action. He worked on the new strategy for climate adaptation with special attention to freshwater, oceans, and nature-based solutions. And he has extensive experience in environment, water, nature, and climate policy. Today, he will share with us the key elements of the EU climate adaptation strategy. Mr. Goossen.
Yes, thank you very much. Nice to be here today, an honor, and also indeed nice to be in the room with all the attendants and also online. To me, the challenge to briefly describe the reaction of the European Union, European Commission to all the knowledge which was just presented by Mr. Deauville. I'm always impressed on the amount of knowledge which is in the reports, and I will focus on how we as the European Union are working on adaptation, while of course at the same time mitigation is extremely important as well. But we all know that nowadays we can afford to choose. We have to act on both sides. Next slide, please. Or should I do it myself? Okay. The green one? The green one? Great. Yeah. Of course, I will not repeat what Mr. Deauville said. He's a real expert. But from a policy point of view, it's quite clear that climate change and water hazards are very closely related. And I always experienced that water managers were one of the first to experience the impacts of climate change and also are quite well informed. But of course, water managers in all aspects, they need to act. And I think today is an example of such an attention. You can see here an overview of the main issues. The intensive rainfall we all experienced, sadly, also last summer. And you can see that flooding but also low waters will increase. The extremes will increase. And of course, sea level rise, it's a real threat. Most people are in Europe, but worldwide live quite near to the coast. And if you see the sea level projections, it's really worrying. And even more that we know that sea level rise will continue, even if we succeed to be climate neutral in a couple of decades, hopefully. We're working on it, but even then sea level rise will continue to rise for another 100 or 200 years, and which is quite scary. So adaptation to climate change, like I said, is very much related to integrated water management. You all know about it, how important it is. And that water management touches upon all sectors. And that's very good to always to underline, is that you can only have good water management if you work together with all sectors. So climate adaptation, water, and all sectors are all related. We had a report issued by the Joint Research Center of the European Union 2 years ago. It was PESETA 4, you might know it. And it made a projection of what would happen. One of the scenarios was a 3 degrees rise in temperature by the end of the century. And which is, yeah, it can be more, it can hopefully it's less. But you can see here that there is a sharp increase of the number of people who are exposed to river flooding, coastal flooding, and droughts. I'll just pick a few of them. And you can see that it's really a sharp rise in both the people who are exposed, both river flooding, coastal flooding, and droughts, but also the economic impact, which is really substantial. And recently, only last month, the European Environmental Agency also brought out a new report on water resources across Europe, which was focusing on droughts. And it's really, very impressive projections of what we might experience already until the period until 2070 in Europe. And you can see also here that droughts is for a major part of Europe a real threat. And of course, this is the hydrological, meteorological drought, and we have water shortage already, water scarcity. So like Mr. Deauville said, it's very much interrelated with the present use of water resources. So in the same report, you will have, I will not go in detail, but I think interestingly enough, it shows what will be the damage and the people exposed. I already showed you, but it also made an estimate of what would be the reduction in damage and people exposed if you have proper adaptation. And you can see that a really sharp of more than 80% reduction in both damage and people exposed if you have proper adaptation action. And that's both for river floods and for coastal floods. So adaptation is also very much about economic sound behavior, investing now, especially in infrastructure, which is out there for many decades. So if you incorporate your mainstream climate change impacts in the future in all your actions, it's a very good economical decision as well, but also, of course, damage will reduce and people exposed. So now to the policy. This is an impressive slide, but this is the European Green Deal, which is the present Commission started 2 years ago. I think this month, 2 years ago, they presented their ambition, and it's at the center of the Green Deal is being a sustainable future with climate change at the center, both mitigation, but also adaptation. But it's also about biodiversity, it's about having healthy food, and it's connected to finance as well and just transition. I only focus on a few of them. It's the increasing the EU's climate ambition, which is at this moment presented in Glasgow. So we did, I think, a major step over the last months of developing European policy on climate mitigation. Hopefully, it will pay off this week. But also, this spring we presented the climate adaptation strategy. And this strategy was a follow-up of the 2030 strategy, which was the first EU adaptation strategy. And we did an extensive evaluation and a lot of consultation as well last year. And this spring we presented this new strategy. And there are 4 objectives: smarter adaptation, more systemic, so everybody involved, all levels and sectors, and we need to speed up faster adaptation. And a new element was stepping up international action. And I will try to focus on the water and nature-based solutions element in this strategy. I only will touch briefly upon them because there's much more into it. So I really invite you to read it. But for smarter adaptation, we have 3 fields. We want to develop more knowledge. There's already a lot out there, but especially the type of measures and how to implement them, there is a need for knowledge, and also their nature-based solution is one of the elements. We need better data on risk and losses, because this is often the basis for action, especially for the financial sector to make decisions, but all authorities and all companies. And thirdly, Climate Adapt. I hope you know the place. It's a platform where all the information on policies, but measures, all the reports you can find there. And I really advise you to have a look at it. We are going to invest in it to make it even better and more approachable. More systemic adaptation. The good news is that all member states in the European Union already have a national adaptation strategy, which is good. But we also, in the climate law, it has been agreed that every 5 years member states have to make a new one, so update them. But there is a room for improvement, and especially, I think, for nature-based solution that's interesting, and water. You all know that river basins are the scale of working together on working on water. And in Europe and everywhere in the world, river basins are often also transboundary. So also the transboundary cooperation on adaptation strategies is quite important. We are going to support local and regional individual people, organizations, authorities. And of course, in fiscal policy, there's much happening, like the taxonomy, which will help to have more money for investment in both mitigation and adaptation. And also that for nature-based solutions is quite important. I will, in a moment, focus a little bit more on the 4th field, which is promoting nature-based solutions for adaptation, which is a really very strong element of the new strategy. And faster adaptation. You might have heard of the missions which were developed under Horizon Europe. Horizon Europe, quite a substantial amount of money for knowledge. But the new element is that we as a European Commission, European Union, we have 5 missions, of which 4 of them touch upon water and adaptation. One is totally focusing on adaptation. The other one is on healthy oceans and inland waters. And the third one is healthy soils. And this is all for water management quite important. And the 4th one is on resilient cities. Reducing climate risk, also there, climate proofing. There was just a new technical guidance presented 2 months ago on all the investments on infrastructure need to check on mitigation and adaptation aspects, which is quite strict, and you only will get EU funding if for infrastructure projects if you meet the criteria. And we invited the member states to also act on that and maybe have additional criteria as well. Closing the climate protection gap is also with water quite important, because all the flooding and the droughts, etc., it turns out that less and less people and companies are covered by insurance. And as the risk will go up, this might be also an economical element. So this is also one of the elements of the strategy. And here the fourth field is ensuring the availability and sustainability of fresh water. So also underlining again that water is a very central element in the new EU adaptation strategy. Just briefly touching upon the field of promoting nature-based solutions for adaptation. We will invest and assist member states to roll out nature-based solutions, because we know that there is quite a lot of knowledge, but the real problem is the implementation of those measures. Some often has to do with it's complex, it's relative new, but also you need a lot of parties working together. And water managers are used to that, but I think even in the water management world, it's known that sometimes it's easier to have a very simple technical gray option, while for nature-based solutions, you need working together with more parties. And so we are going to incentivize and assist member states and also regions to roll out these solutions. Like I said, also financial aspects, it turns out to be a barrier for nature-based solutions. As good news is, for example, that the European Investment Bank also now is paying much more attention. Recently, they had presented a new strategy, and also their nature-based solutions is the heart of their actions. And thirdly, is that proposed nature-based solutions for carbon removals. Is that, for example, floodplains, reconnecting floodplains to rivers, or having reforestation up in the river basins. This is very good for adaptation, but if at the same time you can increase the carbon content of your soil, it's good for mitigation because it reduces the CO2 concentration in the air, but also a higher carbon level in the soils will absorb more the water and infiltrate water at the place where it falls. And this is a very important element. So going to my last slides, like I said, there is one field especially dedicated in the strategy on ensuring the availability and sustainability of fresh water. And there the Water Framework Directive and the Flood Directive are really at the center. And we work very closely together with all the member states in implementing them, and especially make sure that adaptation is in all those actions. We going to pay even more attention to secure and stable supply of drinking water, because with all the droughts and all the changes, but even floods can, like we experienced last summer, extreme flooding can be a real threat for drinking water as well. And but with all the droughts and all the changes and extremes, reducing water use is a really an important element of the strategy as well. And especially the use of drought management plans is one of the issues we are discussing now with the member states. So overall, what are the challenges and opportunities for the water sector, and especially looking at nature-based solutions? The nexus of water, climate adaptation and biodiversity is quite clear, because let's not forget that those same nature-based solutions which help with adaptation are also helping to restore our biodiversity problem, because that's a huge problem as well. And we can hopefully approach both problems at the same time. And like I said, the common implementation strategy is a very important one. And be assured that also in all the plans and all the actions already over the last months, we succeeded in promoting nature-based solutions is at the heart of the working program for the next years. And with the biodiversity strategy is also adopted last year by the Commission. And I always find it interesting that this EU Nature Restoration Plan, which is going to be published in a couple of months, hopefully, but one of the goals of the biodiversity strategy is to restore at least 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers. And I think this is a huge opportunity to have nature-based solutions connected to water management, both fresh surface waters and groundwaters. And emissions I already mentioned. And I was always inspired of one of the projects I was involved in before is restoring the sponge function of the landscape. If you really look at it, there are so much opportunities, but what you need is a holistic approach on all the threats and all the present threats, but even the future threats. And then this, restoring the sponge function is a very, I think, important way of incorporating nature-based solutions. And also this is in the strategy as well explicitly. So hopefully it will help with all together moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This works? Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Goossen, for this very comprehensive presentation on what the EU is doing. Now that we have seen the European level, and as you said very well, action needs to be taken at all levels. I will now ask our next speaker, Mr. John Dratton, to join us. Our very own Scottish representative as the COP26 is taking place in Glasgow, to share with us a little bit how international objectives can be translated into concrete policies at the national level. Just a word of introduction, Mr. Dratton has over 30 years of experience as a public servant. He is currently the Deputy Director for Water Policy in the Scottish Government, with responsibility for the Scottish water industry, which includes sponsorship of the public corporation Scottish Water and the Hydronation Agenda, which focuses on the economic, social and environmental development of the value of water resources in Scotland.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. So it's a real pleasure to be here in Brussels. Actually, it's partly because it's sunny and I've just left Scotland where it's pouring with rain. I've been at COP all of last week, so I've spent a lot of time in Glasgow during the last week. The very first day of COP, we had such an intense rainfall that 2 bridges that had been in existence for 150 years were swept away. So we've had some fantastic science and we've had some great context in terms of European policy set out there, all of which made complete sense to me. But somehow, you know, when you really see something that's been around a long time disappearing, it doesn't half bring it home. And I think, you know, we always said back in the day, perhaps it'll be when we start to see one of the islands in the Indian Ocean being really challenged by rising sea level. Well, that hasn't quite happened yet, but we are starting to see these extraordinary events within a European context right on our own doorsteps. And I think we should take very careful note of that. You'll see from my job on the previous screen, I'm Deputy Director for Water Policy, but I also have responsibilities for both energy and climate change. So my office is completely appalled that I have come to Brussels today and I'm not in Glasgow. but I've chosen to be here because I think it's really important actually to bring the messages from Glasgow here and to join colleagues. So I'm very pleased to be here. So there are many contexts for why we should be doing things differently in the water industry. We all have a huge amount of legislation that's there that affects the water industry, and we have to comply with that. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. They sit there again as a big drive to say everybody should have access to clean water and good sanitation. That's just a basic principle, but it's very, very important that it's there. We have a range of other frameworks that can help us manage our water industries more effectively. The OECD Water Governance Framework, for example. And we have global climate agreements, so the Paris one, and now we hope Glasgow will also place further imperatives on us to take action. So how do we respond to all these contexts? We've seen this climate science, we have all these pieces of law, these frameworks, these aspirations. Well, you've got a choice. You can comply You can set yourself some distant target, a vision perhaps, or you can simply say, do you know what? Let's just try and maximize what we can do. Let's try and do absolutely everything to the best of our ability. So the Scottish response, if you like, we have a publicly owned water and wastewater utility. It's owned by the government. It serves pretty much everybody in Scotland, bar a few private supplies. So 5.5 million people. So we've responded by setting a net zero route map. So not simply a target and a date, but actually a route map that details which actions we will take when to make sure we achieve net zero. We're going to achieve it by 2040. Okay, so we're even faster. The Scottish national target is 2045. The water company will do it by 2040. And I'm currently discussing with them how we can pull that even further forwards. And we think we'll be able to do that. So we do have a water sector vision, which describes to the customers, if you like, what the water industry will look like. But the route map takes you to the vision. The vision is not disconnected from the reality of actions we will take. And yeah, I want to put a bit of context in there. Our prices are going to go up. We've had that conversation with our customers and said, yeah, above the rates of inflation for the next 6 years, we will be at 2% above that, because we are saying there are so many challenges that we have to take action now. This is part of the transition. But of course, we'll protect those least able to pay in that journey by making sure that their prices are actually flat or falling during that time. So we need to bring everyone with us as we make these changes, but recognizing the reality of needing to make that change for us meant putting our prices up. And we need to increase our investment in both resilience and flood reduction, but increasingly we need to move to the green, blue and not the grey infrastructure. And all this sits in our context of the Scotland Hydronation Strategy, which essentially says we should maximise the value we get from our water resources. And that value is financial, yes, but it's also environmental as well, so and social indeed. So it's all the possible aspects of value, if you like. I don't expect you to read this slide. Just read the top line. It's a bit like a test in an optician's. You know, it gets smaller and smaller as you go to the bottom. But I just wanted to say, just wanted to sort of put the vision out there. But the important piece is that we will be admired for excellence, secure a sustainable future, and inspire a hydrogenation. We want the water industry. It is already well respected in Scotland. It's already very popular, so we're fortunate in that regard. It has a rating. It's amongst the top 10 companies of all sorts, so retail, manufacturing, all sorts, in terms of customer service. So it's considered to be a very high-performing company, and we want to drive that even further. So here's the net zero route map. That's what we need to do. It's just a number. It's a very large number. You need to break it down. And so we've broken it down. As you can see, our first target is to get 3/4 of the way there by 2030. And the crucial thing there is generating 3 times our electricity usage with renewables. So we're nearly there already. We're at about 2.5, 2.6 already in terms of how much renewable energy we're driving off our land. So we're doing that by spinning turbines in pipes. We're doing that by putting solar PV panels on every piece of spare land and every building we can find. We're there doing it with hosting wind turbines on some of our higher catchments where we haven't already reforested them. We're doing it by capturing the heat from our wastewater. We're also managing our energy efficiency. That's very important to do that as well, optimizing our energy usage as well within the networks. But every opportunity to generate power we take. So again, going back to that very first slide, are we seeking compliance? No, we're looking to maximize every single opportunity to drive energy off the system we will take. So where you go from a large water pipe to a small water pipe, rather than just let the pressure out, spin a differential turbine instead. Every pipe that's coming in and out of a water treatment work should have a turbine on it. Why not? It's just flowing. It's just in and out. It's free energy. Yes, it takes capital investment. Yes, it takes planning, but essentially it's there within your networks. Capturing the heat is going to be really, really important. When we talk about that, bringing everyone with us, the just transition, if you like, bringing heat into people's homes as part of that deal is very, very important. And yes, we'll plant trees and restore peatland as well. That's absolutely essential, because another part of our aspiration is that across our investment program, we will be net biodiversity positive as well. Not every program, part of the program will be, but across the whole year, every year we will improve and enhance biodiversity. And that's something we've been guilty of going the opposite direction for many, many years, pouring too much concrete, not really thinking about the impact. So that's what we used to do. A large storm tank underneath Glasgow. It's only a couple of years ago we built this, £100 million. Huge thing. First day we brought it into operation, we had a storm event and it was full. Literally, first day. And several times after that, it's been used many, many times. But what we need to do is more of this. So these are cheap. Doesn't cost very much to put these in, but they take surface space and they involve working with multiple partners to get them to be effective. And you have to have them in so many places across the city. So we've done an analysis of many of our cities in Scotland, and we know how many of these we need to put in, and it is hundreds. So you are talking about changing the surface vision of the place, how it looks, how it feels. But if you look at the one on the right in particular, yeah. I nearly fell into that mistake. The speaker's error of saying on my right, on your left. The one with the road. It's not such a weird thing, really. I mean, it's not so unusual. It's just a little tweak to what we're used to seeing in terms of a pavement and a road being next to each other. Just a little alteration. And we just have to start going through that process. So whenever I try and convince people about this, I had a skeptical minister quite recently who was saying, well, I just don't understand what you're talking about. So I just took her to the window and pointed to the street outside, just described how it would look. See the building over there, that will need to have some renewables on the roof. See the building over there, that should be green. See that street down there, the pavement is twice as wide as it need be. Let's do this and this. And she started to go, so it'll look different. Yes, it will look different. Yeah, very important that it will look different, but actually it can be really popular. There's no reason at all why it shouldn't be popular. So we need to start doing more and more of this, and we're doing an awful lot of it. We're also using our canals. I walked along your beautiful canal this morning, and again, we're using that as a drainage opportunity for a large part of the city of Glasgow. We have a canal running through. And to make it possible, we had to put some telemetry on it, so we actually knew how much water was in the canal, how much capacity we had at any one time, and to manage that dynamically so that we can take the water and manage it through the canal dynamically. Historically, the water was going into the canal to some extent, but we didn't know how much was going in, we didn't know how much capacity we had. So we've used technology to give us the parameters of how much we can use that canal, but it's just using the infrastructure. Essentially, so nature-based solutions, yes, but also using your existing post-industrial and infrastructure as well to use that. It's very important. So what does it look like on paper? Well, for us, it's a 6-year rolling investment plan. So we set out every 2 to 3 years, we just keep rolling it and rolling it, demonstrating to the public what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. We set out our charging transparently so people know that what they're paying for it as it goes along. We have the route map. We have a plan for blue-green infrastructure, water resilient places, we call it. So it's a policy now adopted by the Scottish Government that we should, as we build, we need to build places that are water resilient. So that means ones that can attenuate water, soak water into the ground rather than put it into the sewers, but also defend people against these intense rainfall events that occur. We have a long-term asset strategy. So our intention is to build fewer and fewer assets. We're already saying we will not build another sewer, another major sewer. We will just maintain our existing sewer and we will take water out. That's the aspiration, is to remove water. So the opposite to the direction we've been in, build more, build bigger, increase capacity, new everything. So it's now about refurbishment of existing assets, removing assets where we can, and taking water out of those assets. Really, really important long-term strategy for our assets. But our assets are old, so we do need to replace them sometimes. And again, we need to factor that in. So it's important to have that long-term vision for your infrastructure. And I say the context of the Scotland, the hydronation strategy, maximising the value you get from your water resources, not compliance, maximising. And of course, we're doing some things for people as well. So we top up taps, water fountains. So, and we got through APE, we had great advice from Eau de Paris for how to set those up. Hugely popular. We didn't realize how popular they would be. So we're putting more and more of these top up taps out into towns and cities. People are using them in huge numbers. We've saved 1 million plastic bottles already, and they're really, really popular with people. Clean rivers, beaches, bathing waters. So we're already at 88% clean rivers at the moment. We're about to get to 91% in the next 3 or 4 years, and we're just going to push that all the way until we get to 100%. Really, really important. Plastic, sure. And our next treatment works. The next one we build, 100% recovery. So we'll change the name. No longer wastewater treatment works, resource recovery centres. Really, really important that we maximise, not take as much out as you need to create compliance in the river, take some phosphorus out, take some night, no, take it all out. So I'll finish. We created this slide before COP started. Okay, so this is our aspiration from a Scottish Government perspective for how COP26 will go. And you can ask me in the coffee break how I think it's going.
Thank you very much, John, for this presentation and a little insight on concrete and forward-looking policies in Scotland. Now I would like to take it to a lower level and go to the regional level to complement the picture. And we will see now how regional authorities can be actors in the climate transition with Miss Emily Lavender, who works at Brussels Environnement, the Brussels Regional Agency for Environment. She's coordinator for water. She's also working for the Water Operators Platform and in charge of the network of municipal water reference and water grants. Her areas of expertise include integrated stormwater management and integration of water in land use planning. Please, Ms. Lavender.
So, hello everyone. Yes, I am Emilia Vander. I work at Brussels Environment. This is the authority in Brussels in charge of the application of the water policy. I'm really sorry in advance because I think that my speech is going to be in Franglish. I'm not really good in English, so I hope you are all going to understand what I want to say, want to explain. So, to understand what we want to do in Brussels when we are talking about management of the rainwater, it's important to understand the context and what we are dealing with. Because, yes, there are nature-based solutions we have to do that's everywhere, but we have to understand how we can do with the context and the specific issue. First, in Brussels, we are characterized by the disappearance of the natural water cycle, the disappearance of the hydrotrophic network. There was a trend to a progressive artificialization of the water system. Of course, like a lot of other cities, we use water courses as a waste disposal, so like sewers, and there was an hygienist movement. So we vault all these open sewers to limit the spread of disease and epidemics. There was also a disappearance of overflow areas, the drainage and ponds of wetlands. Another characteristic is that there is an increase in the rate of impermeability. So because of the urbanization of the city. Of course, there is also the specific natural landform. Brussels has several valleys. And last but not least, we have an uniform and outdated sewage system. Of course, when there is a rainwater, they are guided to the sewer system. But this network is really too old. It was built in the end of the 19th century. And sometimes at some places it's so bad that there are road collapses and that generates a significant repairs and maintenance cost. This network is also unsuited to the city's current needs because there has been a significant urbanization in the recent decades. So there are more people now. We are using the sewage system. This explains why some sections of the sewers are now inadequate to deal with the large influx of water. So now that you have all the context, the issues in Brussels, we can also talk about the impacts. I think that the previous presentation were really clear about the global impacts, but here there are some images of in Brussels. And it's not very far away. One is from this summer. So if we guide rainwater to the sewage, that's what happens. That's why we need nature-based solution. I'm not going to speak a lot about this process because we talk a lot about the impacts. But what we see about the impacts is, of course, the floodings. But there are a lot of other impacts, like an iceberg, where we don't see it directly. The loss of quality of life in the city, the lack of clear water, which are for the soil, the groundwater, the natural rivers or wetland, the wastewater, and of course, the overloading of the sewer system. So now let's talk about the solution. I'm sorry also in advance because in Brussels, I don't say a nature-based solution. So there is a mix in my head between my vocabulary and nature-based solution. But there are different types of solutions to manage the water. Yes, nature-based solution is really what we prefer to do if it's possible. You can have a rain garden, you can have a green roof, green wall, and so on. But we can also put permeable floorings and underground structures. That's also other solution we can put in a city. And with all this solution, really that makes a big difference. So now I want to explain the vision that we have for the management of rainwater in Brussels. This vision, of course, evolved with the years. We are talking more about integrated rainwater management. And the integrated rainwater management for us is an element of what we call the rain network. This integrated rainwater management is like nature-based solution. The goal is to deal with the water where it rains. We don't go so far with the water, so we use the infiltration, the greening, so the outflow go to the soil, to use the sponge soil, and to use the atmosphere. We are also talking about integrated because, a roof is still a roof, even if we don't manage the water on it. So it's just something more. It's not the purpose of a garden, is still a garden. So it's not something we are going to put there specifically to deal with the water. We had a function to a space. But in Brussels, there are a lot of solutions. And yes, there are a lot of partners. It's not easy to make the change happen. So there are also something else that we accept, but we are not meeting all the challenges. But it's okay. It's also a sustainable rainwater management. We separate the water. There is always some limited flow, some buffering. But there, the outflow go to a network of rivers, a network of rainwater, a network of sewage. So it's not perfect, we accept it. So now that we all have in mind what is nature-based solution, integrated rainwater management, I would like to talk about the importance of the actors. Because yes, it's really important to have transversality, to have partnership. In Brussels, of course, there are the water actors. There are Brussels Environment, Vivaqua, la SBGE, le port, who is dealing with the canal. And of course, there are the politics. We cannot do integrated rainwater management if the government doesn't push it. We need money to do it. We need to guide the partners. So it's really important to have the politics. Of course, there are also a lot of planificators of the public space. We can put a nature-based solution, the developers of the public space, the municipalities, because in Brussels, of course, there are several levels of power, and the citizens. Everybody has something to do to have a nature-based solution. So now I'm going to be at my beating heart of my presentation, the action plan in Brussels. That's really a mix between what we are doing and what we hope to do. So sometimes I'm going to speak in the present, sometime in the future. So for the nature-based solution, of course, the goal is to the operational implementation. We have to have nature-based solution in every renovation, every construction, every time there is a planning, every time there is a legislation, we have to put nature-based solution. We have to implement a nature-based solution in all construction. So we have to also identify existing surfaces according to the degree of feasibility of disconnection from the sewage system. We have to use park for infiltration and so on. To go in the real field, the operational, we need guidance, of course. We need to define the role of each actor. And what's still a big work to do in Brussels, we have to put the NBS in the legislation. Into the spatial planning. The ambition of zero discharge outside the plot has to be transposed into the environmental permits. Of course, there are a lot of professionals, so we need to put guidance to guidance for the change. A poorly applied rule is counterproductive. The aim here is to ensure that the actors involved in the implementation of NBS take the ownership of the subject and to develop their own skills. So they have to, the real appropriation of new skill needs coaching, needs training, and then a structural integration of NBS in acts and work. Also, of course, we also need financial mechanisms, subsidies, because NBS has no individual return on investment. So now we can also talk about sustainability. We need to know where are all the NBS infrastructure in the city, and to know if they are working good, to monitor them. We need also a geo-references register, so we can check the effectiveness, the maintenance, and the control. And last but not least, for the innovation pool, we need to create commitment. We need to create commitment with all the actors. So we need a pilot project. The establishment of a pilot project will lead to a greater involvement of all the key actors. And we need also to prioritize area where disconnection of rainwater from the sewage system is the easiest and the cheapest. And after that, this implementation, we need to highlight in a constructive way what the mistakes we have done. And of course, if we have no mistake, we have to highlight this project. And ultimately, it is necessary to reduce the resistance of the change. Because really, there is a lot of resistance when we want to change something in the city. And so we need to evaluate the risk, because there are several subjects generate legitimate reticence among certain experts and actors. These include the impact that runoff can have on soils, on road planting, and finally on the quality of groundwater. So we need to have a balance between the risk and the advantages. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lavender, for your presentation, for presenting what is being done and what needs to be done around us here, and also stressing how important it is that we all work together. For the final presentation of this first session, I am happy to welcome Mr. Jan Verheke, who will give us the perspectives from the European Network of Advisory Councils on Environment and Sustainable Development. And just a couple of words, Mr. Verheke has been the director of the Flemish Environmental Advisory Council and since the early 90s, and he chairs the EEAC's working group on ecosystems and water policy. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Pleased to be here. There have been excellent talks before me, so I hope to bring something additional. Indeed, my name is Jan Verheke, etc., etc. The EAC stands for the European Environmental and Sustainable Development Advisory Councils. And just a short word about it. Here you have a definition. We have 18 members. We are established by law. Experts or representatives of stakeholders giving advice to governments on plans, policies, etc. Now, these councils have been existing since the 70s. But in '92, we came together, formed this network, and the Rio conference of '92 brought us also inspiration for new councils, councils for sustainable development. And then in 2015, we had Paris, we had some additional councils, new members, and these members specialize in climate policy. That's all about our history, but now something about our working group, my working group, which I'm chairing, which is originally, it was working on water policy. And you can see it in the results. First, we discussed the Water Framework Directive and how it was being evaluated, what were the results, what were the likely improvements. Gradually, we shifted attention. Now we are more into food policy and agriculture. In between, in 2020, we had a session about water quantity governance and climate change. And in that session, the report of the GRC was presented. And also we had something about energy and water provision. So the relationship between both. Now, I say all this because I have to clarify my position. Indeed, we have no recommendations at hand that are clear-cut. What we have are exploratory recommendations in which we explore what our councils could recommend to the national governments. And once we have a working session, we have kind of preliminary recommendations, which the councils take home, which they use when they give advice to governments. So nowadays, today, we will have it about exploratory recommendations for national adaptation strategies. Now, as always, in dire situations, and I studied law, the first thing you have to do is to consider your legal position as a national government confronted with the challenge of adaptation. What is your legal position? And the legal position is clear, especially for member states, because since recently we have the climate law. There has been an excellent formulation in Article 5.4. You can read it if you want. I've analyzed it in 10 points. Those 10 points have to be executed, and then your legal position would be okay. If not, then you have to face future supervisory actions of the Commission, potentially, and that's more grave, you have the problem of the standard of due diligence, which is also at hand for the non-member states, as Scotland nowadays is. Due diligence. Has the state performed well to protect its citizens? And we have a number of climate cases for mitigation, but due diligence is also applicable to adaptation. And if a state doesn't take enough measures to protect its citizens against the effects of climate change, then it has not performed well, and it could face problems before court. And I think Article 5.4 is an excellent formulation of due diligence. So the first set of recommendations is consider your legal position and come to due diligence. The second one is more formal. I now analyze this provision and I take out what is categorically the same thing. The second set of recommendations would be about what the state needs to perform formally. It needs to adopt a strategy. And as has been said, most member states have a strategy. It needs to implement it. That tends to be more of a problem. It needs to assess it, the situation as well as the results. It needs to update it, and it needs to report on it. And so all these actions need some presuppose some systems in place. And the first question is there a governance system in place that can deliver within due time the requested strategies and plans, updates and reports? If not, improve the governance system. It's very simple, but it's not so simple, as everybody knows. In every member state, there's trouble about this. So improve your governance system. The same thing about governance. The relationships between national, regional and local, and the relationship between participants, between stakeholders. If this is not in place, improve it. Because if you don't improve it, you'll get problems. So it's a very simple recommendation. And the third one is the scientific and statistical communities sufficiently equipped to produce in time analyses, assessments and indicators. If not, reorganize them. In many member states, there's a lot of brain power, but it's not well organized. The reports are not in time, they're not well founded, and they're not believed by the public. So reorganize your scientific community. Those are very formal recommendations, very simple recommendations, and very necessary recommendations. Now we turn our attention to the next element in 5.4, and this is taking into consideration the Union strategy on adaptation, as has been explained in the first talk, very important strategy. What needs to be done now? Now we have seen, apart from international cooperation, which is another thing, not really relevant today, but I will come back to it later. We have three pillars. We need to be smarter. We need to be systemic, more systemic. And we need to be faster. Also here some exploratory recommendations. The first one is on smartness. The Commission will provide or is providing a series of knowledge instruments. You know, the ADAPT thing in which you can find a lot of knowledge. Well, use it. Not all member states are using it fully. Disseminate it to the grassroots and the local governments and organize risk assessments instead of climate blind decisions. This is the first series of recommendations. The second one is on systemic. I would say two things. First, reconsider budgetary mechanisms. In the strategy, it is more about risks. And once there is something wrong, you have to pay a lot and be ready for that. But it's also about reconsidering relations with local authorities, because member states tend to support local authorities. On which conditions, with which means, for which purposes, and also reassess your investment plans. The other type of recommendations would be on the fastness. Implement the Water Framework Directive and the Flood Directive fast and thoroughly. All member states are lagging behind. This is a real problem because the Water Framework Directive is concentrated on strong systems, robust systems that are resilient. And if it is not executed well, those water systems are not resilient. I come back to that. And then reassess infrastructure policies. We go further and further. Have I got enough time still? Okay, so I have to go faster. Take into account the vulnerability of different systems. I now concentrate on the water system, but we have two water systems. We have your water system, which is the sector of water services. And then we have the natural or semi-natural water system, which is the water cycle, water systems 2. First, some recommendations on 1. In the strategy, it is about reducing water use, improving efficiency, etc., etc. It's very important, but I think the main recommendation would be reconsider your business models, and for the member states, facilitate the reconsideration of the business models of the water sector and facilitate local authorities to address vulnerabilities. I can say a lot about business models, but that's maybe for the question time. I go first, faster. More recommendations, and now on water systems 2, the water cycle. Here we have some elements in the strategy, but not many, because it's talk about the Water Framework Directive, and so I turn attention to the Water Framework Directive. Originally, or in the last decades, the Water Framework Directive was something like, oh, there is a problem, there's an element of non-compliance, let's take some measures concentrated on this non-compliance, otherwise we get trouble with the Commission. That's the monitoring and then the ecological status. Now in the last years, attention is gradually changing and is going to what are the root causes of this non-compliances, and the measures are more and more concentrated on the root causes. And I've put here soil, flow, and substances. I could put there as well sectors or drivers, but what are the root causes? This is much more important because we want strong water systems. We don't want compliance for compliance, we want strong water systems. That's the main purpose of the Water Framework Directive. So this means that the recommendation to member states would be improve business models as well of farmers, foresters, nature managers and developers, because they are the users of the soil and the water. They are the influences of the strong system or the weak system. They need to improve their business models. I go further. We should promote nature-based solutions, the theme of today. I first point to an OECD study, co-financed by the Commission, I think, which is on financing water supply, sanitation and flood protection. And one thing we learned from that in our council is that nature-based solutions and green infrastructure should be considered as real infrastructure policy. It's not simply a metaphor. Most people think, oh, green infrastructure, nice metaphor. No, it's not a metaphor, it's infrastructure policy. And so the choice between gray and green, which has been presented by the former speakers, is very important, and there's a method for that. You can choose methodically for that, so do it, etc., etc. We go further. Now some recommendations finally for the Commission. I found some texts in the climate law. So the Union should seek to create favorable regulatory environment to adapt. That's in consideration. Article 5.5, the Commission shall adopt guidelines for the prudential management of material physical climate risks and to integrate them in projects and programs. And in the adaptation strategy, given the systemic nature, adaptation action will be implemented in an integrated manner. Well, the recommendation to the Commission, which would be, please do it. It's necessary that the member states are really pushed towards adaptation, and not only on the level of adaptation strategy, but also on the other strategies, much more important. For example, the elephant in the room, the agricultural strategies that are at the moment being drafted in the member states, they are not all optimal for adaptation. They could be better. So please do it. And the other thing is improve the transboundary cooperation on river basins, take up the role of therapists, because the relations between member states is not always as well as it should be, my impression. So that would be the last recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verheke, for this very good analysis of what needs to be done to activate action and respond to policies from the European level, and your independent advice to member states to take action. This wraps up our first session. I think we have a few minutes for a few questions from the audience. So I would like to give the floor to you all. If you're here with us in the room, it's just like 2 years ago, please raise your hand and we will hand you a microphone for your questions. Just make sure to tell us who you are and who you're addressing your question to. And if you're with us online, as I said before, please just send your question in the chat box. All right, any questions? Yes.
In order of what I see first.
Good morning, everyone. Benjamin Gestin, General Manager at Eau de Paris. I've got one question for Mr. Goossens and Mr. Verheke, one question for John, and I had another question from Mr. Douville, if he's still with us. I'll start with a question from Mr. Douville. There's a big debate in France. I'm just asking a question because that's food for thought. There's a big debate in France about the idea of slowing down the natural water cycle while using like hillside basins, hillside artificial tanks to just retain winter excessive water that falls in the winter but is in excess, and keep it, save it for the dry season. And that's a big debate in France, and it's not natural, but it's presented by the farming lobby as a nature-based solution to cater for the needs for irrigation. So just, if someone has a comment on that or an opinion on that, that's the best thing. From Mr. Goossens and Mr. Verheke, I hear in the adaptation strategy of the European Commission, one of the ideas is to reduce the use of water. That's the idea of DG climate adaptation in the European Commission. But if the DG Health in the same European Commissions goes for stricter health regulations as far as drinking water is concerned, then water services, as the one I have the honor to manage, will have to put in more treatment processes which consume water. So how do you make sure that there's a global, comprehensive, coherent drive towards climate mitigation adaptation within the European Commission, within the EU system by and large? And for John, if you can send me your route map for net zero at Scottish Water. My email address is benjamin.gestin@eaudeparis.fr. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benjamin. Since it's already a packet of questions, I also had a question from Cian.
Thanks. Just a short question for John on the water resilience target that you are setting yourselves. I was wondering, not sure if it's an issue at all in Scotland, but are you also thinking about the drought impact, or what happens if you put in so much new green infrastructure which needs more water if you don't have it?
Yes, surprisingly, for a country that has a lot of rainfall, We also this year suffered a very long period of no rainfall at all. We had maybe 2.5 to 3 months with almost no rainfall. So yes, we suffer water shortage, particularly in the east of the country, less so in the west. So we absolutely have to manage that as well. So it's about making sure that we have interconnection between our water supplies, that we can move our water around efficiently. And so we absolutely need to have water efficiency in the home, in businesses as well. We need to use less water in those places and make sure we manage the water supply, because we want to maximize the amount of water that's left in nature as well. We don't want to over abstract, so we have to tackle that as well. But yeah, no, it's absolutely a threat to us, even though people think of Scotland as being very wet. Actually, we have long periods of dry weather, particularly in the east. So it's yeah, it's a really important issue for us to manage that. So you have to look at the overall flows of water, and you need the data to understand the movement of water across your country, where the demand is, and make sure you can meet that demand. And yeah, so that's very important for us.
Yes, from the Paris, the questions. Yeah, water reduction, of course, first let me underline that the strategy is a strategy of the whole Commission. So all services were very much involved. So that is first. It's not a strategy of only one service of the Commission. So, but of course, as always, reduction of water, you can do it on many aspects, but you also need to take into consideration health, sustainability, energy use, etc. And of course, this is always the balance, finding the balance. And it might be that for some very like health, you might have a little increase of water. You prefer not to do it, but if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. And on other sectors, you have an extra task to reduce it. And your first question on, I recognize the suggestions often made of building concrete basins for water. It always strikes me that we have a huge basin in Europe for storing water, and that is the soil. And we have been influencing the soil so much that the sponge function has been damaged to some large extent. And often we did it for example, to have 1 week earlier to go to your soil for your agricultural production. But in the end, it now turns out that those past measures, if we can counteract them and we start to see the soil as a big reservoir, you don't need to build those concrete basins that much. So that would be my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, perfect. Do we have any more questions? I also check with my colleagues if we have anything from our viewers online. No, that's it. All right, then with a few minutes of delay, I would like to close this first session, which has been really helpful to review the impact of climate change on water resources and really stress the importance of ambitious political commitment at all levels, but also, as was mentioned by speakers, effective coordination between different stakeholders and different levels of administration. Before we move on to the next part, I would like to invite you to take a short break. I think we can go for 10 minutes. And the coffee is served just in the next room. I will see you all in 10 minutes.
Today is a very important day for us, Águas de Gaia, and for me in particular, because it's the first event that Aqua Pública Europeia organized in Portugal and organized in Vila Nova de Gaia.
Iwan Ligaya and friends Miguel Lemos Rodriguez for proposing and involving Aqua Publica in the organization of this high-level conference. The debate confirms how the protection and efficient use of water resources play a key role for the future of our environment.
Today is a very important day for us, Águas de Gaia, and for me in particular, because it's the first event that Aqua Publica Europeia organized in Portugal and organized in Vila Nova.
Screen. On the next speaker. So if I do that, then I should share it, huh? Application. What happened when I did this? Can they see me?
They can see in the screen now. You can maximize.
I can't. That's what they see now.
You can share screen.
Let me thank the Chief Executive of Iwan Ligaya and friends Miguel Lemos Rodriguez for proposing and involving Aqua Publica in the organization of this high-level conference. The debate confirms how the protection and efficient use of water resources play a key role for the future of our environment.
Today is a very important day for us, Águas de Gaia, and for me in particular, because it's the first event that Aqua Publica Europeia organized in Portugal and organized in Vila Nova.
Agua de Gaia and friend Miguel Lemos Rodriguez for proposing and involving Aqua Publica in the organization of this high-level conference. The debate confronts how the protection and efficient use of water resources play a key role for the future of our environment.
Today is a very important day for us, Agua de Gaia, and
Donc, il m'écoute? Bonjour, les speakers online. Vous m'écoutez? Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Marco, okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Hi.
Hope you're enjoying the session. I'm the little voice here in Zoom. So
Yes,
we will
very nice.
start soon. And
Can you
as
hear us properly?
Sorry?
Can you hear us well?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay.
Marco, I think I can hear you. Can you talk?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think that should work.
It's
Yeah?
fine. Yeah, it's good. So you already seen the dynamic. It's a bit, you share your screen and then we will manage the IT from here.
Yeah.
Shall I already do that now, or?
Sorry, wait.
Shall I already do that now, sharing the screen?
Yeah, it's, you will be sharing the screen, right? I don't.
Yeah, I'm the first speaker, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I share now?
No, it's fine. My colleague Joanna will resume the meeting and she will start to give you the floor as we explained you before. So it should be fine. We will start in 2 minutes. I think people just started to come back to the room. So we will call you back, okay?
Yeah, great, thank you.
See you in a minute, bye.
Bye.
So you work in Copenhagen for the European Environment Agency?
Yes, I do, yeah. And where are you based?
In Luxembourg at the EIB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, very dense this morning's program, yeah, with lots of policy matters and
yeah.
But I like the practical examples very much. Yeah, that's what makes people learn from each other, because the policy is one thing and then how to implement it is the other, definitely.
Exactly. And there is of course this issue that nature-based solutions are many things to many people, and
yeah, sure.
Okay.
Good.
All right, I suggest we resume. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice short break. So during our first session, we discussed policy, we discussed governance, and now we will take another view at the opportunities and experiences with using nature to build sustainable resilience in an integrated manner. And for this, I will first ask Mr. Yvele Hoogeveen, who is online with us, and who is an expert for climate change and bioeconomy at the European Environment Agency's Climate Change, Energy and Transport Program. And today he will present to us the findings of a recent EEA report that focused on nature-based solutions and some key aspects that are related, of course, to our topic, water management. Please, Mr. Hoogeveen.
Yes, I'll try to share my screen now.
Good.
Yes, I hope it's visible for everybody now.
Yes, perfect. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for having me and allowing me to participate from Copenhagen. I would have liked to be there personally, but COVID restrictions prevented that. But yes, I'll talk you through some insights on nature-based solutions that we have gathered as the agency, the European Environment Agency, which is based in Copenhagen and performs environmental assessment for in support of policymaking at European level and in the member countries. Now, that is a very wide-ranging set of activities, and I can, in the 12 minutes that I've got, only give you a very brief overview of things. So I thought up front I'd like to share what kind of sources we have that address nature-based solutions. And there is a recent, all these reports are very recent. There's one on agriculture. There's one on the application of nature-based solutions in policy frameworks and case studies. There's one on the urban environment. There's this very recent report on water resources assessment. And I would also like to draw your attention up front to a very detailed and very good overview of assessment frameworks for nature-based solutions that was produced by the European Commission. As I said, nature-based solutions are many things and can be solutions to many things and be applied at many different scales. So it's actually a very complex set of activities, and nature-based solutions are very much a kind of umbrella concept. Now, just to recall a little bit what we're facing here, I have the projected precipitation change for the 2080s, both the annual precipitation and the summer precipitation. It was already mentioned before, and these changes in the precipitation and in the climate will have big impacts, not only on flooding risks, but also on sectors like agriculture. And I focus a bit on agriculture here, because agriculture is both very susceptible to climate change, but also a possible solution, both because it generates greenhouse gas emissions that we probably can tackle through mitigation measures, but also because agriculture can be used and land use planning can be used for adaptation measures. Now, given this changing set of climatic conditions, agriculture across Europe is faced with very different challenges. And water shortages and droughts are predominant in the Mediterranean area, whereas in the eastern and northern parts, we will see more precipitation. I should also stress that extreme weather events, both rain and droughts, are projected to occur more frequently across the region. But you'll have a very differentiated picture. And if you look at agriculture, it's about how can agriculture adapt to climate change, but also what can agriculture do in a wider perspective, land use planning perspective, to reduce flooding risk and disaster risks. Now, first, the impacts on agriculture itself then. Here, this is work done by the Joint Research Center. I show you projected yield changes in a high emission scenario for climate change. And as you can see, these impacts on yields can be quite dramatic, particularly in Southern Europe, and particularly also for the rain-fed systems. Of course, irrigated systems can sort of counteract these climate change effects, but of course, that will add to the regional water stress. These are basically the challenges that agriculture is up against. And it also has an impact on income, agricultural income. In this particular graph, you'll see this is a not very long projection. It's the income change projected in the mid-20s and with 2014 as a baseline. So it's a short-term projection. The two maps show an income change with and without adaptation. And if you look closely, then you can see that the adaptation measures for agriculture, things like crop rotation and the soil measures, that they can actually help to offset the negative consequences of climate change. Now then to nature-based solutions. As I said before, it's a sort of container for many different things. I've shown here the official EC definition, European Union definition. They are solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, and they should be cost effective and simultaneously provide multiple benefits. And by doing that, build resilience. And it should result in more diverse and natural features and processes in the landscape. Now, the picture that I showed here is of, I think, of a rather successful nature-based solution in the Netherlands. It's the Blauwe Kamer, an area for water retention along the river Rhine, and where the water is can be stored in times of high water levels. Now, what you also see here is that this area has been taken out of agricultural production, so you only have here extensive grazing and nature development, a nature development area. So this is not an adaptation for agriculture, but it's an adaptation where by withdrawing agriculture, where water can be managed in a way that it also creates natural environments. But obviously you will have to look at these nature-based solutions, not only at this very local level, but also at the regional level. As for these nature-based solutions, they are increasingly applied and mentioned in a range of policies, first and foremost at the global level. So there are a range of policy frameworks that explicitly mention, well, not perhaps nature-based solutions as such, but approaches that are very similar, like ecosystem approaches, ecosystem-based approaches, green infrastructure, blue and green infrastructure, and water retention measures. Now, if you look at that, all these policy frameworks have explicit references to disaster risk reduction and also to climate change adaptation. And the level of support in these policy areas is generally very strong. At the EU level, we also see a very wide adoption of nature-based solutions in different policy frameworks. This gives an overview. It's derived from the report that we produced in 2019. And you can see that, again, there is a range of terms that are being used across these policy frameworks. But again, most of them refer explicitly to disaster risk reduction and to climate change adaptation. This is why we say nature-based solutions are actually an umbrella concept that cover the whole range of different approaches. Now, what are these approaches then? One of the key characteristics of nature-based solutions is also that they should be multifunctional and should address different sectoral interests. And you can see nature-based solutions that have started from particular angles with particular sectors in mind: biodiversity-related, forest-related, forestry-related, land use and forestry, the water sector, agriculture. And in all of these, nature-based solutions play a role and can be initiated from a particular primary perspective. But of course, what is very important is the multifunctionality and the multiple benefits across these sectoral interests. How that basically works, here is an overview of main things that can be done. If I take the example of agriculture, the key climate hazards are put on the first row, and the nature-based solutions options that would be applicable on the bottom row. For agriculture, you could think of crop and livestock loss due to heat stress as a climate change-related hazard, increased risk to pest and disease outbreaks and water scarcity, and what I already mentioned, damage to yields, transportation, and asset loss due to flooding. Now, the nature-based solutions options then, from an agricultural point of view, would be improved soil and water management, crop type diversification and rotation, and agroforestry. But if that would be done, these measures also have important consequences for the water retention capacity of the soil, and thus have also prime benefits for water management. And similar links exist between basically all these categories of nature-based solutions. So between water management and agriculture, between agriculture and forestry, and between forestry and green spaces in urban areas. So what I would like to stress is that these nature-based solutions have this multifunctional aspect to them. And that leads me to my key points. Nature-based solutions is an umbrella concept. It covers a very wide variety of approaches. And they are increasingly adopted in, as I showed, in EU and global policy frameworks, and applied at multiple scales and across multiple sectors. That multifunctionality is important, and it's also why stakeholder involvement is key for their success. Now, that leads to an issue if you want to assess them at the European level, at a higher level. If you look at local and regional measures, the first thing you would need is a dedicated evaluation framework that applies to that particular setting and to that particular set of objectives that is strived for. And framing these evaluations is something that needs careful attention. And this is also why I referred to the European Commission guidance handbook that has been published. Another point that relates to these overarching benefits of nature-based solutions is that overarching strategic planning and evaluation need attention. If you look at local and regional approaches, one of the key objectives is to try and upscale these at landscape level. And you would need to know to what extent that is possible, what would be necessary to upscale these approaches successfully and create an approach that also at landscape level functions. And there you'll have to look at things like counteracting factors or things that may be beneficial at the local level, but not necessarily fit in at the landscape level. So there is also an element of strategic planning and overarching evaluation that needs attention. And this leads me to the focus of our current work in this area, and it hasn't been finished yet. We are looking into these evaluation frameworks and particularly at how evaluation frameworks have been developed and exploited. And we are looking into the upscaling potential of these nature-based solutions to make them also work at landscape level and to truly generate the benefits that we strive for. And here I would like to stop and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoogeveen, for this presentation. Now I would like to call Ms. Eva Hernandez to share with us an NGO perspective. She leads the WWF's Living European Rivers initiative and has 20 years of experience in working on policy, including water policy and water management. She will share some views on the potential of nature-based solutions. Please, Eva.
Well, I think every minute that goes by, this is more challenging, no? Because almost everything has been said. I don't know if you can put my presentation because that's my script, and I already forgot how to talk without a PowerPoint in front of me. It's a bit sad. I'm sorry. I think there are many things that have been said about nature-based solutions. I don't want to go bit by bit. I just want to focus on 3 reasons why we should work with nature-based solutions and to focus on one of the multiple challenges that we have to implement them. And before I start, just a quick comment on how much we are talking about nature-based solutions and how little it is being implemented. And as we were commenting during the coffee break, the theory is there. We're still missing some data, as you can imagine, but what we are still missing the most is the implementation. So I hope this tempts you into trying nature-based solutions from your activity. The first reason, and we saw it clearly, is that we cannot afford business as usual any longer, no? We are seeing, we have seen it this year was crazy. It was like watching a superhero movie where the super evil bad guy wants to control the world just by destroying it and causing floods, heat waves, even volcanoes, no? And at the most unexpected moment, like we have in Spain right now. We have transformed our landscape so much that what we are seeing is very far from nature. So thinking about nature-based solutions, well, we need to rethink nature, no? We have 7,000 large dams and more than 1 million obstacles in our rivers. How are we not going to have floods? We have 90% of our floodplains transformed. 60% of them are occupied by farming or farming-related uses, which is very relevant to point because they have to become an ally into implementing nature-based solutions in floodplains if we want to have room to implement nature-based solutions. And despite all this transformation, this attempt to control nature with more dams, more dikes, we didn't manage to solve it. And this is the example from last Friday. This is Sarajevo being flooded right now. The rainfall was still very heavy yesterday. I hope it's going down by now. But yeah, it's happening, and we didn't solve it with the traditional gray approaches. And countries are not facing the problem. The Water Framework Directive was presented several times today as a key tool to adapt to climate change. In fact, it's one of the objectives of the Water Framework Directive to help us adapt and mitigate climate change. But this is how the map looks like. We together with other NGOs, we have screened several river basin plans, 26 if I'm not mistaken, and well, there's no green as you can see. the ambition to recover the good health of the rivers is not there yet. A little bit in Finland. Well, sorry, Finland, but you're quite close to the North Pole and you have little people. So maybe it's because it's a bit easier there. Although I don't want to reduce the weight of nutrient pollution, also the challenge that we have around the Baltic. This is what we have. Some countries don't even have plans. We didn't manage to assess all the bases, but I think we have a good example of what is happening. Law compliance, it was reminded also this morning, and pushing for the law compliance and demanding the law compliance also from the sectors that are being affected, because it's the water supply also one of the first sectors that is being affected by not having the Water Framework Directive fully implemented. Another reason, nature works. It has been there for thousands of millions of years. It has experience. It is effective in handling the challenges of climate change. It's flexible, much more flexible than a dike, and it's efficient. We have worked with Deltares. We have a colleague here from Deltares. They have done some research to identify if there is really financial efficiency, economic efficiency around investments in nature-based solutions, and there is. Before I show you some examples, I wanted to point out, because I heard before that we're talking about green infrastructure versus grey infrastructure. Well, that's part of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions go much farther than infrastructure. Coming from an environmental NGO, I have a little bit of a challenge thinking of nature as an infrastructure. It hurts. For us, infrastructure is much more linked to cement, to hard engineering. And although we need a lot of engineering knowledge around nature-based solutions, because we need to know how the hydrology works of rivers to be able to play with it, I think it's more than an infrastructure, and maybe that is the challenge, because there are some things that you cannot just fix rules for all the rivers across Europe as you can do for all the pipes across Europe. No, it's different. It's really context-based. So having said that, let me give you some examples of nature-based solutions. And I'm going to move outside of the urban area, because this is also relevant for the urban area, as relevant as it is for the rivers, to have healthy drainage systems and avoid these excessive floods coming from the cities, full of pollutants, and coming too fast from what nature is used to, and also eroding the rivers and causing problems to other sectors. This is the case of the Lodderitz forest in the Middle Elbe. This is a floodplain restoration. This is, as was also presented right now, a case where the flood space was recovered for the river, and this already has had positive impacts in flood levels. So on an average flood, the flood level is reduced by 30 centimeters. It may not seem a lot, but it's the difference between getting your ankles wet or not. No, that your ankles are dry, it's not a flood. When your ankles get wet, when your garage gets full of water, when your old books get wet, then you start to worry. So those 30 centimeters really make a difference. And this is just a little bit of an example. We have to see, as was also said now, how can we upscale this? How far can we go? How far can we go into recovery in our rivers? It was also mentioned before. We could see an image of Brussels and how the drainage system has disappeared. The rivers that were there disappeared in the lower parts of the rivers, because if we go to the upper streams, what we see is that drainage has increased so much that the water, instead of percolating into the ground, goes so quickly down that, well, it was one of the reasons that we had the floods from this summer in Germany and here in Belgium, no? So we turned the drainage system completely upside down. And if we want to recover it, well, investment in nature-based solutions is the way forward. Recovering this floodplain is not only useful for preventing floods or handling floods, it's also useful for droughts, because it holds the water on the ground. It was also mentioned, everything was said already, I'm sorry. But the capacity to store water that we have in the soil is often neglected, and we need to think again of it, and not only of hard infrastructure, more dams to store water for water supply. And at the same time, When we store water in the ground, of course, it's cooler. It can help us deal with heat waves and reduce the risk of fires. This is an economic case. It's not only effective, it's efficient. So if we compare business as usual, this is the analysis that Deltares did for us. If we compare business as usual compared to nature-based solutions approach in the lower Danube and the Danube Delta, we can see that the cost of handling floods is lower, that the expenditure to adapt to climate change is also lower, and there are additional benefits coming from nature-based solutions in the region. If you're curious about this report, it's available online, both in our website and Deltares. I can share the link later. We have other examples on water quality. This is an example from Finland, where we have come to agreements with farmers to recover wetlands, natural wetlands and recreated wetlands. We have lost so many wetlands in Europe. The last analysis that I saw, it was more than 56%, but the truth is we don't even know how many wetlands we lost, because we didn't even know how many we had. And still we don't have a good inventory of all the wetlands we have. And some are skipping to be included into the Water Framework Directive river basin management plans. But they do have a role in storing water, in cleaning water, filtering, and reducing nutrient and sediment pollution from reaching the rivers and affecting other sectors. This is an example from South Africa, but it also plays in Europe. By removing invasive vegetation, which is a problem in many places, or they managed to improve water availability. I guess you remember this walk to day zero, this countdown to day zero in Cape Town a couple of years ago. Well, this was one of the measures implemented, and it did work. A similar measure was implemented in Spain some years ago around Doñana National Park, where the eucalyptus trees were just pumping water out of the aquifer, and by removing them, it didn't solve the water balance, because there are many other challenges around the area with agricultural abstraction, but it did help recover to a certain extent the level of the aquifer. These are nature-based solutions, no? Recovering the natural functioning of nature to have it working for us instead of trying to fight nature. This is another example very close to here in the Netherlands, where we are working to reopen Haringvliet, at least temporarily. Haringvliet is one of these huge dikes that are preventing the Netherlands from being flooded. But the Netherlands is seeing that if they continue with the same approach, the coastline is not growing as it should. And the impact of sea level rise would even be worse, because we cannot keep on building higher and higher and stronger dikes all the time. I mean, we can, but it's quite expensive, and I don't think we can afford it, and the environment cannot afford it either, because this dike implies that salmons are not reaching basal, for example, and salmon is not only a nice food to have if you like fish, but it's also a source of income, and it's an indicator of the life in the rivers. Nature provides multiple benefits, and this is probably its blessing and its curse, as we will see now when I reach the challenges part. This is also an example, and on the ground in Germany, where all these benefits were measured, and I better run. I think I'm in challenge 2, no? in reason 2. Okay. Reason 3. The world is ready. We have seen it. I mean, even the World Bank is ready to invest in nature-based solutions. The European Investment Bank was mentioned before. The Green Deal, I mean, there is no single document in the Green Deal where nature-based solutions are not mentioned. So the framework is there. Now the challenge is, as I said, is to have it implemented. But what is the biggest obstacle for it to have it implemented? I just want to focus on one. There were many challenges mentioned today, but I think probably the biggest one is that nature-based solutions are multi-sectoral. They don't only affect one sector. If you had to go with the navigation sector and work on something, you lobby the navigation sector, you go for them, you corner them, and then you have things moving. But nature-based solutions, they affect everybody. The challenges multiply. Different challenges for different sectors, different ways of perceiving the challenges, of measuring them, of measuring positive and negative impacts, of different interests, trade-offs. Policies were also mentioned. Policies that used to be single policies and are not used to be integrated, although now, maybe with climate change adaptation plans, It's the way to have it moving forward. Different timelines, even short-term thinking, long-term thinking, land ownership, rights. I mean, that is the biggest challenge. So my message here is that we really need to work together. I mean, if we really want nature-based solutions to move forward, to benefit us all, and I think it was clear that we need them, that we cannot continue without them, we need to talk openly and build partnerships with all the sectors that we can. I call to practitioners, measure cost benefit in a different way, please, to include all the variability and multiplicity of benefits of nature-based solutions. Use nature to integrate policies, engage people, engage other organizations, don't do things on your own. And to EU decision makers, well, I think many things were said today, but I would add that we would like strong binding targets in the new restoration law coming up in 1 month, more or less, to phase out harmful subsidies. We cannot continue giving money to the things that are working against nature. Introduce a nature-based requirement to EU funds. We cannot afford giving money for something that is not nature positive, and enforce existing regulations. On our side, we're doing something. We got together with Aqua Pública Europea and with many other partners on the Merlin project. We are developing 17 cases on the ground, also together with Deltares, Wageningen University, Boku, 44 partners all over Europe to implement 17 cases of nature-based solutions, to lift new data and to work with the 6 sectors that are represented down there, to work with agriculture, to find where is the win-win in nature-based solutions, with water supply, of course, navigation, insurance sector, which has a lot to say with regards to nature-based solutions, peat extraction, and hydropower. So my takeaway message for today is if we want nature-based solutions and we want them, we have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for making a very good case for nature-based solutions, for working together to fight the bad guy that we do need to fight before the end of the movie. Now you mentioned Deltares and the economic case for nature-based solutions. So I'm very happy to call our next speaker, Ms. Sien Kok, who is an environmental economist at Deltares Research Institute and specialized in economic assessments of nature-based solutions in urban and coastal climate adaptation. And yes, she will now share some insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanna. Yeah, so apologies in advance if there's any overlap with the presentation we just heard. I was one of the co-authors of the report, which showed up a little bit in Eva's presentation. But I'll be taking you along in the economic storyline and really trying to go a little bit back to basics. So sometimes when we hear about nature-based solutions, it sounds a little bit like it's the solution to everything. We see a lot of attention in the past years. We've already seen a lot of reports coming by, including a lot of reports about the economic value of nature-based solutions. Just to show you a few that came out in the past 2 years, I think, some of which might be familiar. Past years, this year's Dasgupta review from the UK was very, very large, basically stating that value should really be at the heart of all of our economic decision making, which I think also was one of the recommendations of Ibele that we just heard. WWF Living Planet report even put an actual value on nature. There's more reports that have done this, and it goes into insurmountable amount of money. And just in October, the ISD came out with a report that stated if we have, we want to sort of bridge the gap in development, sustainable development, that would cost us about 500 billion, I think this is a year, if we use grey infrastructure, but only half that if we use nature-based solutions. So there's a lot of it going on at the global level stating the economic case for nature-based solutions. Now, my question is, do they really always make sense? And if that's the case, how does it work? How do you show that? How can we substantiate that? And one of the answers is that, of course, what is economic sense? What is an economic rationale? That rather depends on who you're asking. Here you see an overview of the investment decision rules. I think this is from the Asian Development Bank. stating basically that depending on the kind of project that you have different reports that you need to do, studies that you need to do. So if we can express the benefits in monetary values, then you have to do a full cost benefit analysis. If you can't, then we go to cost effectiveness analysis. I'll quickly also point out some of the tools that are out there to support valuation, easy valuation. And in the end, because this was asked, I'll focus a little bit on how it works if we're zooming in on water quality. So for those who are not very familiar, cost effectiveness basically is how costly a measure is just in reaching a single goal. And you use that if you're going for cost minimization, if you want to achieve your Water Framework Directive in the cheapest way. And I know that all of us here know, okay, multifunctional, that's what nature-based solutions are about, but this is still very, very common because we have very compartmentalized institutions where each department has its own function and they're usually trying to go for cost minimization. I'm gonna go skip this a little bit. Just one of the tools that are out there that could help you in trying to identify cost-effective solutions, including from nature-based solutions, is a toolbox here, Climate Resilient Cities Toolbox. It's available online, where you can sort of draw in your urban environments either gray or nature-based solutions, and then immediately see an estimate of the cost and also an estimate of the effect. So that's one of the practical tools out there. So whether or not nature-based solutions are actually cost-effective, and this is not always the case, is affected by a lot of factors, including the local physical setting. A mangrove is very effective in a muddy coast, but maybe not so much in a sandy coast. The required performance level, are you designing for a 1 in 5 year event or a 1 in 1,000 year event, strongly affects the cost effectiveness. Whether or not there's already infrastructure present, or if you're designing in a total greenfield, a new environment. And of course, this was mentioned before, nature-based solutions is, although nature has been out there for a long time, still an innovation. And that translates into higher costs, higher risk premiums, less effectiveness. Of course, multifunctional. So really, if at all possible, we should not be looking at cost effectiveness. We should be looking at the broader economic rationale for investment, which is usually done in economic cost benefit analysis. Really looking at things from a welfare perspective, public money, public goods. I'm not going to go into the entire, but there are a lot of guidelines out there on how cost benefit analysis should be done. And in the end, what we're looking for is anything that has a positive balance, more benefits than costs. And there are many countries out there that also set standards on how high the benefit cost ratio should be to warrant investment. Usually higher than 1, but at least it should be higher than 1. I'm sure you're aware that in many cases this is already mandatory, or it's part of a mandatory broader evaluation framework, particularly in a somewhat larger scale. So what we see in urban environments, more smaller scale investments, this is not common. We are usually looking at cost effectiveness analysis or no analysis at all to compare different measures. As mentioned, there's an increasing amount of databases, guidelines for support. The majority of those are still designed and developed for conventional infrastructure. Over the past years, there's been more and more also about nature-based solutions, which is a whole different field of economics, really more on ecosystem service valuation. Also here, just zooming in on the urban environment, there's a range of tools, practical tools out there that can help, such as the Belgian Nature Value Explorer, where you again draw in some sort of design scenario, and then the tool gives you surprise monetary values. And there's this huge guidelines under that, like of hundreds of pages explaining how these values are calculated. Just a quick sidestep here, away from welfare economics. Sometimes you also hear talk about the business case. What is the business case of nature-based solutions? A business case in my book really is much more from not a welfare perspective, but just a private cash flow perspective, where we really look at the revenues, actual cash flows coming out of a project that are higher than the cost. And as soon as that is the case, then there might be a private company willing to invest. And then we might also not have to do this publicly anymore. Still, of course, that's also possible. And this could either be because of an actual cash flow, a benefit coming out of a project, could also be that it's part of the bigger business model and nature-based solutions is just a cost-effective solution for something that has to be done anyway. And I'd like to point out a quite nice report of last year here, also by WWF, trying to identify cases as well as blueprints for bankable nature solutions. And that's really looking for those kind of structures or frameworks where we have this revenue case, where we have this cost-effective solution. For example, I think also somewhere in the UK, a wetland project where the water group invested in a wetland because it saved them money. Yeah, it was just cheaper for them to do this than the other type of infrastructure. And they also used, and I think we'll have a next presentation about that, financing. So they used a loan where private investors can step in to provide funds. Zooming in a little bit on how does it work if we're looking specifically at water quality, how do you value that economically? There was a study done for the European Commission, I think in 2017, 2018, called Blue 2, really looking at, okay, how do we assess those policies in a socio-economic way? And related to what we just talked about, they have two approaches. So first, we're looking at cost effectiveness, where we really are looking, okay, these are the goals that we have set. The indicators based on the Water Framework Directive. Sadly, they didn't include the wastewater treatment. And basically the assessment is just, okay, if we want to reach those goals, how much costs is it going to cost us? And what is the most effective solution? The other way they looked at and developed was a bit more rooted in cost-benefit analysis, a more welfare perspective, looking into ecosystem services, and they specifically did an assessment using something we call willingness to pay, which comes down to asking large groups of respondents from different countries, how much are you willing to pay for better water quality? And the results of that you can see in this table. And of course, it differs per country because we have different income levels. But you see that in Europe, it ranges a little bit between €5 per household to 50. So, and then, well, that's in the end what you look at is, okay, how many households do we have? And that gives us some assessment of the value of improving water quality in that area. Of course, that's not the only way that we could value the benefits of water quality. There's many other ways in the field of ecosystem valuation. You can think, for example, about lower health costs, increased recreation opportunities, fish production, etc. Now, a little bit on the evidence of the impact of nature-based solutions, specifically on water quality. I didn't mention it here, but of course, in the report that Eva just mentioned, there's also quite some assessment where we're looking specifically at nature-based solutions on river systems, including water quality. But a very nice report that I noticed that came out last year just analyzed all of the studies that have been funded by the EU, how nature-based solutions projects, water quality and water body conditions. And some of the highlights I wanted to share with you are that they, looking at the urban environments, see that integrating nature-based solutions into the existing grey infrastructure, and existing infrastructure network, particularly for treating point pollution sources, almost always leads to cost savings due to lower stormwater flow and also lower CSO spills. And they also showed that they really are the only viable solutions if you want to treat diffuse pollution control. If you're interested in this report, I didn't put a whole overview of it, but there's quite a lot of cases where they actually do the cost-benefit analysis and demonstrate that on the merits of water quality alone, there is an investment case, there's an economic case. And then I already come to the end of what I wanted to share with you. As we have seen and what you hear in the media, nature-based solutions or hybrid constructions can definitely be cost-effective. They don't always have to be, though. But if you look at the broader perspective in a more multifunctional way, looking from a welfare perspective, taking into account all of the benefits, I think in many cases we will see that there will be an economic case for nature-based solutions. This is not standardly done, though. We still need to integrate that into our evaluation frameworks, as mentioned also by Ibele. So there's a mounting amount of evidence on the economic rationale. But as mentioned before, I think something that it is also for us economists a little bit of a struggle is that there's still limited data, limited monitoring, because the projects that are implemented are not always monitored in a very structural way. And as also already mentioned by Eva, this is one of the things that we'll be taking up in that Merlin project that she mentioned. But we'll also be looking at the restoration benefits of scaling up restoration in freshwater ecosystems. And we'll also be engaging with the economic sectors to look for those business cases. So if they are there, we should really try to engage and bring in that private funding to enable scaling up, basically. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sien, for helping us understand how we can make an economic case to weave nature into decision-making in an objective way. I will now move on to the next speaker, who will indeed talk to us about financing. Mr. Marco Beros, who is with us online, is the lead engineer at the Water Management Division of the European Investment Bank's Project Directorate, and will share with us his views and perspectives from the EIB on financing nature-based solutions. Please, Mr. Beros, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much. I am very pleased that I can attend this webinar. Unfortunately, not in presence in Brussels, but perhaps the next time it will work. So I shall speak about our financing in this kind of activity and talk to you basically about two. Oh, sorry, why doesn't it work? It does. Can't move the slides forward. That's strange. You can see the screen, right?
We can see the first slide. It has
but I cannot use the cursor. That's very strange. Okay, I use it like this. Good. I will present the EIB as a climate bank and then two case studies. So EIB's climate action commitment is from 2016, basically, where we first said that we would like to devote 25% of our financing to climate action. And last year in 2020, we issued the Climate Bank Roadmap. So you can see this document here. And we have the objective to exceed 50% of environmental sustainability and climate action by 2025. And basically, we want to demonstrate in each and every project that we contribute to climate action, either by adaptation or mitigation. Yeah, here are some documents about adaptation. I will not go into the details. So we are partners of the UFIBAC network, which issued the guidelines in 2016 already. Then this year, 2 weeks ago, the EIB issued the climate adaptation plan. And we also issued this document to help our counterparts better deal with the Paris Agreement, Paris alignment. And we can, of course, provide technical assistance. I will not go into the details. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me directly. We shall help you. Yeah, I will go now directly to the case studies because I think it's interesting to show others how our clients handle nature-based solutions and climate adaptation. So the first case study is Europe's largest river restoration project, the EMSHA project, to which we have been contributing for many years. So just to give you the background, it's in the North German region of the Ruhr area, the very industrialized area, lots of mining. So they had settlements which started in the 19th century. Settlements caused heavy flooding. So they created a cooperative, the Emscher Genossenschaft, to tackle all the relevant investments. And well, as you can see here on this drawing, the subsidence of the ground meant that the ground was lower, so the Emscher had to be put in between dikes. So the people here, right and left of the dike, were living below the water level. And of course, lower Emscher level means the confluence with the Rhine didn't work anymore, and they had to be moved northward downstream. And it was lots of infrastructure which was built there in the first half of the 20th century, lots of canals basically. And Emscher was basically an open sewer. And you see that the settlements continued, so they were up to 20, 25, 26 meters. You can see the picture of the bridge, which had to be rebuilt. And because of the settlements, it was impossible to build piped sewers until the end of the 1980s. You see all these open these open sewers, not very pleasant, of course, there. So the Big Emscher project started 30 years ago. It targets to restore the river as it was, collect all the wastewater, put it underground, treat it in 4 big wastewater treatment plants with huge pumping stations, and have the river cleaned up. And this project started 30 years ago, as I said, and involves close to 350 kilometers of restored rivers and creeks, close to 400 kilometers of sewers, and so on. It's a huge project with over 5 billion euro investment amount. EIB has been contributing with close to 2 billion euros of grants, of loans. And you see the cost breakdown is, of course, 80% for wastewater collection and treatment, and 15%, about close to 1 billion for the restoration work, and also a big part of flood protection, flood prevention. So the investment cost per capita is not enormous because it's a very densely populated area with more than 2 million people living there. So here's some examples of restoration. Many constraints exist there. So for example, here it was not possible to move the dike or to remove the dike. It's still there, but here this part is much greener. Here on this side, you see the old canal and the new restored riverbed. Then here another example, the confluence of with the Rhine, which is a 1960s cascade you have seen on the previous picture. All this property was bought by Emscher Genossenschaft and shall be transformed into a sloped confluence so that the fish can migrate from Rhine back to the Emscher with a huge floodplain and so on. So that's how it looked last year. This year the works should be almost completed. The impact on biodiversity is really tremendous, as you can see in the different charts here. You see the increase in species, the increase in aquatic species. Some species could be reintroduced to other locations. So it's really spectacular. And this year, some weeks ago, Emscher Genossenschaft celebrated that the Emscher will now be free from wastewater discharge. So it's a big effort done, but good ecological status will only be achieved in a much more remote time. It's scheduled now for 2039, with some question marks because there's a lot of pollution still in the ground. After 30 years of nature-based of river restoration, they have also seen the lessons learned or the limits of nature-based solutions. First of all, they take time. And it's never going to be a totally natural river because there's so much infrastructure, human infrastructure, built up areas that it cannot be a continuous free-flowing river like we see it somewhere in nice nature parks or natural areas in Europe. So they have the stepstone approach. That means the different ecosystems which are connected to each other. And actually, they observed that the animals, they migrate from one to the other. There's a migrations between these areas. So that's very interesting and already very useful. Then also the flood protection aspect, very relevant today because we speak about climate adaptation. So here you see the picture of the boulder in Dortmund-Mengede, which had its first real test in July during the heavy rains, and you see it performed very well. There were many lakes and artificial polders created with a total volume of close to 4 million cubic meters and a rainwater storage basin. What is remarkable also is that Emscher Genossenschaft disconnected close to 2,000 hectares from the stormwater collection systems. That is a very big effort, you can imagine, in a densely populated area, and also met with some resistance, as you can imagine. Good, case study 2, it's very quick. So our little project here in Luxembourg, the Alzette River Restoration, it's a project which is under the NCFF, the Natural Capital Financing Facility from the EU, which is handled by the EIB. Project cost is tiny at 12 million. It's a very small project, with the promoter being the Luxembourg's Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. And here we see it where it is. So it's 2 locations. One is in the city center in Luxembourg and one north of the city center. So that's how Alzette looked more than 100 years ago, in that little creek. Then in the 1920s, it was heavily modified with all this concrete. So the target is to use this nice park with the confluence with the Alzette, where there's a cascade here, to recreate a free-flowing river with meanders and islands and floodplains, as you can see here. So there will be recreational areas which also serve as floodplains. So the volume here will be very important for floodings. The second part is north of the city, where there have been some river restoration works done in the past already, 20 years ago. So you see that here the river will be restored, and with wet zones. And here you can see the location. So it suffered heavy flooding 25 years ago. This summer it looked not as bad, but there was heavy flooding as well in Luxembourg. So the idea is basically to make the riverbed higher than it was, to fill up the riverbed, which was artificially lowered, connect it with the groundwater level, enlarge it. And in some places, the riverbed was moved from the Talweg. So bring it back to the Talweg to reduce the risk of flooding. So this is just a short overview. This project is currently under implementation as well. Yeah, that was all. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beresh, for this overview, these examples that showcase really the impact of nature-based solutions, the challenges also, and the role of the EIB in this matter. I would like to say we're running a little bit behind schedule. So unless there is a burning question at the moment, I suggest we move on to the final part, and then we can discuss more in detail, either at the lunch break, or if you're online, send us your questions and we will absolutely share them with our speakers. Now we have seen some case studies in this last talk. We have talked about different angles of the potential of nature-based solutions, of the case for nature-based solution. It's been environmental, economic, the instruments that we have to support them. And now I would like to give a voice to the operators, also the water utilities, and talk about a little bit about the case studies that we have in our network in Aqua Publica on the deployment of nature-based solutions. And for this, our first intervention will be from Barcelona, and from Miss Maria Jose Chesamaro from Becasa, who manages the water cycle in Barcelona. And I think she's with us online from Spain. Maria Jose.
Hello, Giovanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. On behalf of Barcelona Water Cycle and the municipality, could you see my screen now? Okay. On behalf of Barcelona Water Cycle and the municipality of Barcelona, we would like to thank the Aqua Publica Europea for organizing this event and for give us the opportunity to share our challenges and experiences about sustainable urban drainage strategy in Barcelona. SUDs are an holistic approach to manage the water cycle, the rainfall in the city, with 4 pillars. The volume control, the quality control, build livable and increase the biodiversity in the city. Why do we need SUDs? In the case of Barcelona, it's very important to prevent floods. because we have huge problems, mainly in the flat areas of the city. We also need suits to minimize combined sewer overflows and the huge impact that they are in the basin areas. We need suits also to improve the groundwater quality. This is the image of our country, Catalonia. I think it's more or less the same in all Europe. We need to avoid pollution at origin with regulation and with the citizen and companies involvement. Suits are a solution, but we need more effort. Also, we need suits to build livable cities, health and well-being places to live. And also we need to increase bioreceptivity in cities with all the beneficial effects of biodiversity. We need to create and connect biomass and biodiversity with these small mosaics. Soils retain more carbon than all vegetation and atmosphere. And also we need to consider this in our city. And how do we manage this paradigm shift? We think building on nature, understanding water behavior, recovering traditional techniques, reaching agreement between the old techniques. This is a great exposition that we collaborated last year about the kilometer zero water. All the water mines and wells only at the beginning of the last century. And we need to reach agreement between the old techniques, the traditional techniques that in the Mediterranean we know very well, with all the digital tools. Different projects for urbanization and remodeling of green spaces incorporates the philosophy of decentralized management with suits in Barcelona since 2005. There are different values for a suit, can be applied in existing or new developments, but for us, the more important word is consensus, because suits are in public spaces, and we need to make efforts together. The water operators, the park and gardens operators, the municipal urbanists and projects office, the sustainable office, mobility and infrastructure, health and public agency. And we established this commission, such commission in 2016, in order to promote a good project with suits in all the city. We have different phases, an experimental phase, an acceptance stage, an integration phase, changes with all this promotion and recompilation of a study of suits. And at this moment, we have here in a standardization phase. Because in our water cycle master plans for alternative water resources and sanitation master plan, we introduce an action line with suits in public spaces and parks and gardens, with significant results in water management volume and also in pollutants retirement. We have also a great effort to have the inventory and cartography with GIS and GMO in order to standardize all the data model and all the documentation for the works. We also last year published an technical guide for all the solution about South, because we need good criteria for this new development, and some limitation in some cases that is impossible that these techniques can be applied. Also, we need to know about the geology, the edaphology, all the condition of our cities. It's very important to classify the different techniques in order to have these standards, to have information for all techniques and all the, and it's so important to have a good cost beneficial assessment in order to evaluate the social, environmental benefits and the economic cost of investment, and also the management. Management and maintenance of suits are very important, because it's very easy to open a new suit, a new garden, but the difficult thing for cities is the maintenance, and also to evaluate the benefits in all the aspects. And finally, we have an ongoing project that is a huge project in Barcelona. It's the Barcelona Superilla, Barcelona Supergo, in order to remove in the center of the city the cars and build a green and pedestrian-friendly area. That also we have suits in all these proposals, because we need this kind of streets in this century. And if you like discover more about our projects, there are some reference about the master plans and all the for Barcelona. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose, for this very interesting example of what's happening in Barcelona. I now suggest that we travel to Italy with our next speaker from Milan and from the Gruppo CAP, the utility in the Milan province, Mr. Marco Calerio, who is a hydraulic engineer at Gruppo CAP and who's also, I think, with us online. Marco?
Okay, just trying to share. Okay. Let me know if you see my presentation.
Perfect.
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to Acqua Pubblica Europea for the invitation. As already introduced, I'm Marco Calerio, and I'm responsible for hydraulic invariance office in Gruppo CAP. I'm a senior hydraulic engineer, and in general, I deal with the design of projects for the resolution of flooding problems in urban areas. In the latest years, I did some projects for the implementation of such sustainable urban drainage system that I will illustrate in my presentation. Okay. First of all, hereby I give you some information about Gruppo CAP. It's the public society that manages the integrated water service in metropolitan city of Milano. And in this slide, you can see some of its main data. In general, the typology of a sewage system is mainly combined, even in the latest urbanization, have been implemented with a separate system that treats the rainwater by infiltrating in the soil or discharging into a water body. A very important feature of our territory is that it is one of the most urbanized areas in Italy and perhaps among the most urbanized in Europe, with a development of the territory that didn't consider at all the compatibility with the urban drainage, system. Therefore, during particularly intense meteorological events, episodes of urban flooding are very frequent, with consequent damages and circulation difficulties. In recent years, there has been a change in rainfall caused by decrease in rainy days and an increase in intensity that contributed to significantly increase the need for intervention in case of emergency. This is also connected to the increase in the frequency of heat island, with a consequent higher risk for the weaker population. Since 2016, in the regional legislation of Lombardia, the definition of sustainable urban drainage system that you see in the slide has been introduced. And in general, it follows many definitions that can be found in other regulations. The same definition was then used in regional regulation number 7, that it introduced the concept of hydraulic invariance and that promotes the use of sustainable urban drainage system, and in particular, nature-based solution for the management of rainwater. In the last 3 years, CAP collaborated with other partners on the Life MetroAdapt project, which ended on the last September. MetroAdapt aims at mainstreaming climate change adaptation strategy in metropolitan area of Milano. More specifically, the project aims to fostering the creation of a common well-structured governance related to the climate change adaptation among the local authorities and produce tools that allow local authorities to implement cost-effective climate change adaptation strategies and policies adapted to the local context. With this project, CAP has implemented 2 pilot projects to demonstrate the feasibility of a sustainable urban drainage system for retrofitting intervention on existing surfaces and area that were drained by the combined sewage system, contributing to a functional improvement of the network. In particular, the two projects were carried out in two municipalities of the metropolitan city of Milano, Solaro and Masate. In both cases, the project was characterized by the disconnection of the existing drainage system and the implementation of a sustainable urban drainage system for their management. As you may notice, it was deliberately decided to intervene on small surfaces to demonstrate that it's possible not only on a large scale context, but also on smaller ones. During the evaluation of the choices that lead to the identification of the design solution, we try to privilege, obviously, the nature-based ones. In Solaro, the project took place in a parking lot about 5,700 square meters, which was drained by an internal collective system to the mixed sewage system. The project was aimed at implementing a mixed solution, the impermeabilization of the southeastern part of the parking lot and implementation of a bioretention and filtration basin, combined with the two dispersion systems composed of draining infiltration wells. For the correct design of these works, it was necessary to verify the permeability of the soil and the absence of underground utilities. As you can notice from this section, the bioretention area was created through a succession of layers of gravel of different sizes and the introduction of plants that were suitable for this type of works. For example, able to withstand the longer dry periods and condition of complete flooding. Overall, the final cost of this project amounts to approximately 207,000 euros. In the slide, you can see some picture of the parking lot in Solaro before the surface was completely impermeabilized. On the right, you see the area after the intervention with the new bioretention area. As you may notice, along the perimeter of the bioretention area, there are some openings for the direct drainage of the rainwater. In particular, the depth of the bioretention area is higher in order to let them to be completely flooded during the meteorological events, so they can retain water and compensate the infiltration capacity. In Masate, the project was about the disconnection of existing drainage system of a parking lot and a part of the street, where discharging in the mixed sewage system. The project was aimed at the implementation of a rainwater retention basin in an existing green area, with discharging to an existing water body. The discharge will take place with a limited flow rate in accordance with Lombardia legislation. The maximum depth of the retention basin is about 1.5 meters, and it is expected to retain about 110 cubic meters for a maximum water rate of 0.5 meters. In this case, it was not planned to infiltrate the drained waters due to the poor permeability of the soil. The cost of this intervention is about 95,000 euros. Here are some pictures of the area before and after the intervention. As you can see, the basin was inserted in the marginal portion of an existing public park, whose identity has been enhanced thanks to the new hydraulic functions. In the spirit of the project, the area was to be fully usable, but unfortunately, the municipal administration asked to insert a wooden fence for safety reasons, and as it feared that someone would go down into the basin when it is flooded. The experiences of Solaro Masate developed within the Live Metro Adapt project has already been replicated in other projects. In a first example is the realization of a water dispersion basin in Varedo in order to drain a parking lot of about 2,000 square meters. The basin has been implemented in other area of the parking lot, and in this case, the collected water is infiltrated in the soil thanks to the good permeability levels. The cost of the intervention was around 120,000 euro. It has been financed by Lombardia region. Another example is the realization of a new public parking lot in Paullo with a surface about 1,100 square meters. In this case, the bioorientation area on the side is the only drainage system of the parking lot, which provides for the complete infiltration for the surface runoff water, given the excellent permeability of the soil. In this case, the work was financed by the municipal administration. Another experience is the water park in Paderno Dugnano that is a new typology of project on which we are currently working. The project is aimed at the implementation of a urban water park characterized by an environmental and landscape system qualification, the integration of an existing function with multi-purpose spaces, and the creation of a multifunctional water system for a managing rainwater composed by different nature-based solutions. The project is ambitious and the design phase is currently underway with some problems mainly related to the incomplete understanding of the project by the public opinion, which required a preventive activity that has been carried out with a specific path of participation to let the people better understand the purpose of the project and integrate it with some proposal. For the development of further projects, we are working together with some municipalities in order to participate to a regional funding call. In particular, a first call is linked to the dams of urban regeneration and provides for the proposal to create such to redevelop municipal areas such as car parks or roads. Another call we are participating is related to the issue of the impermeabilization. More specifically, it aims at the implementation of intervention for climate adaptation and mitigation based on the use of sustainable urban drainage system in order to increment permeable areas and favor the infiltration of rainwater, reducing the risk of flooding and the formation of it island. Here you can see the two proposals submitted for the municipality of Canegrate and Paullo. In this slide, I've tried to summarize some of the main aspects to consider in the implementation of sustainable urban drainage system in the territory. The permeability of the soil and the depth of the aquifer are fundamental for a correct design, but it's also necessary to relate to the municipal administration, as this work must be well integrated into the urban context. A very important aspect for a company like CAP is to increase its ability in the design of green projects that are not usually the responsibility of this sector. In conclusion, this experience has shown how sustainable urban drainage system can also be implemented in intervention on a micro scale and on existing areas. So they are not limited only to the new urbanization. Their design must be taken care of to adapt to the context and fit harmoniously, especially as regards the green infrastructure. The main issue is how to finance these works, as they are not always directly financeable with the integrated water service resources. Indeed, in case they are not financeable, it's important to find the resources somewhere, for example, by keeping an eye on national or regional call or establishing good relationship with other authorities in order to create fruitful collaboration. To conclude, I hereby suggest that you have a look at our manual and good practices about the use of sustainable urban drainage system that you can download from the link that you see on the slide. And also our website where you can find some materials about sustainable urban drainage system and hydraulic invariants. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marco. And I know we're a little bit late. I will ask for a few more minutes of attention as we move to our last but in no way least presentation of the day, with Mr. Armando Quazzo, who is the Marketing and Development Manager at Società Metropolitana Acque Torino, SMAT, the operator in another Italian city of Turin. Armando, please.
So yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Like in the good old days, I am the last obstacle to your lunch. So I will try, in order to increase the pleasantness of this speech, I will try to keep my presentation as concise as possible. We are not talking about rainwater this time, but about drinking water. Just 2 words on SMAT. We are in the northwest of Italy. These are few numbers on the company. Is the public-owned company that provides the integrated water cycle to about 2 million inhabitants. Our city was more known in the last year for having hired Cristiano Ronaldo in our soccer team, but also the water is good quality. Raw water that we take from the environment this is the graph. Let's say 15% from spring water. We are close to the Alps, and therefore we enjoy a good quality of water running from the Alps. We have about 2/3 of the water that comes from a deep aquifer, from groundwater, and we have 20% from 15 to 25% of water that we take from surface. Surface means intake from the river Po that runs very close to our main drinking water production plant. So we started to think about the environment, and let's say that the surface water we were abstracting from the river was, and still is, very vulnerable due to the fact that runoff are frequent, that floods are frequent, that the level of turbidity of water may raise very quickly due to rain or due to heavy rain. So we started to think about lagooning systems, and since in every territory you do have gravel quarries, because where you build roads, where you build anything, you need gravel. You still have these lagoons, I would say natural lagoons that spot the territory of many of our cities. So we started to think to apply the best available technique to obtain an homogeneous raw water for drinking water, and also to think about a measure to let's say adapt to the climate change that we are facing. In 1995, we studied and started the executive planning of I would say the refurbishment of gravel quarry. That was a gravel quarry of 2 million cubic meter. So we said, why not reusing an existing infrastructure for our own purposes? And from a couple of years, from 2002 to 2004, we realized the work. And this work started operating in the correct way, and it really operated in the correct way for many, many years. Therefore, we now are pumping the water from the reservoir, where it's naturally filtered into this reservoir, and we reduce the use of chemicals. We reduce the use of many components that we use to flocculate I would say the water that we use in the cycle. So we started with another SWOT analysis. Why not making it bigger? Our former reservoir of 2 million cubic meter was enough to stand about 7 to 10 days of the whole city of Turin, which is about 1 million inhabitants. The study brought us to open to a new second reservoir that will be in operation in about another 3 years, and we will increase the quantity of water that we store in this reservoir from 2 to 7.3 million cubic meter, and this will give the autonomy to the whole city of Turin up to 30 days in any case. And we are not just talking about drought, we are not just talking about lack of water from the river, but also in case of pollution. because you know, rivers are often the carriers of pollution, and should the pollution occur in the water that runs in front of the drinking water treatment plant, it would be a great problem. So let's say that we found it a greener solution for a better environment, because as you can see, the gravel quarry you can see in the picture in before is still on operation, and we want to transform this reservoir into something different that you can see on the right-hand side, a place where water is stored, with a place where people can enjoy the environment, can find a new place for a better walk during or after the day of work. In conclusion, let's say that this kind of nature-based solution works on an existing infrastructure that probably is present in many other cases all around Europe, gave us in all these years of operation lower operation and maintenance costs instead of taking the water directly from the river. It improves the resilience of the supply chain, because we are stronger, we are more resilient, we will have a larger autonomy, and we think it's a very sound and replicable solution, because we can really say from 10 years of flawless operation of the system. So that's it. Just one word, because we don't want to leave anything behind. Also on the rainwater issues, there you can see a part of the city of Turin that was flooded. Was frequently flooded due to rain. We used the existing channels of an industrial city. You know, industrial city Turin had a very strong industrialization from the beginning of the 20th century. So water was used inside channels to produce electricity and to produce power. And we used these channels to store the rainwater. And that picture that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, it doesn't occur anymore. This, I would say, is a nature-based solution, because we used what man had made before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Armando. As clear and concise as promised. So that closes our sessions and our presentations for today. I would like to, of course, warmly welcome all the speakers. Thank all the speakers, and for the very rich conversations that we've had. We've covered a lot of ground on why we urgently need action, what we can do, and how we can do it. I will not take more of your time. I will ask our president, Mr. Bernard Van Nuffel, the president of Aquapublica, to just close this morning with his conclusions.
So I am the very last obstacle between you and the lunch, I think. I will not try to summarize in 3 minutes all the rich discussions we had this morning, but I will highlight some key points, 4 or 5 of them. All different presentations that we listened today contain a clear call for actions to tackle climate change. As we have seen with Hervé Douville, we are facing extreme and abrupt change in the water cycle. Hazards will be exacerbated: droughts, wildfire, heat waves, flooding, windstorm, biodiversity losses. The situation is very, very strong, very complicated, very frightening. It's also clear that managing climate change requires the involvement of the entire society in all its articulations, from civil society to local, national, and international institutions. And of course, with the support of the European Investment Bank. If there is a clear awareness about the urgency to act, we have seen that business as usual is not an option. then the challenge is to understand what is the most effective and fair way to do so, and how to coordinate our efforts in our adaptation strategy. As you have seen this morning, nature-based solutions, a kind of umbrella concept as told by Ibel Ogeven. Nature-based solution can be a useful instrument. They require innovative ways of thinking, effective coordination among all actors, and a long-term perspective. In return, as we have seen with SynCoc, they provide a cost-effective way to address climate change in combinations with other types of solutions and other co-benefits of bringing nature back. Starting from international commitments and trickling down all the way to local policies, all actors have the responsibility to play in ensuring a sustainable framework for the future, as we have seen with John Ratchen and the Scotland Hydronation Strategy. As the EU is currently revising some key water legislation, including the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, it will be critical for the new legislation to be well tailored to achieve water protection objectives while building sustainable and fair water management. Then these new rules and international commitments will need to be translated into concrete national actions, following the recommendation of the EEIC told by Jan Verbeke. The role of local and regional levels in the implementation of environmental policies is increasing as nature-based solutions require long-term and integrated territorial planning based on the coordination of different actors and authorities, and also a new financial mechanism, as we have seen with Emily Lavender. Finally, as we were told by Armando Quazzo and Marco Calerio, finally, water operators are adopting new approaches and exploring new solutions to always better serve citizens while caring for natural environment and maximizing their investments. I conclude by saying that the members of Aqua Publica Europea are committed to working with all stakeholders to implement nature-based solutions that will benefit altogether citizens and the planet. In name of our Vice President Alessandro Di Martino and myself, I want to thank so much our staff, Milo Fiasconaro, Alicia Gaban, and of course, Giovanna. Sorry, Giovanna. It's the stress, you know. For the preparation of this event and for the moderation of our discussion. Thank you so much. And let's have lunch now.
Today is a very important day for us, Agus de Gaia, and for me in particular, because it's the first event that Aqua Publica Europeia organized in Portugal and organized in Vila Nova de
Let me thank the Chief Executive of Aguas de Gaia and friends, Miguel Lemos Rodriguez, for proposing and involving Aqua Publica in the organization of this high-level conference. The debate confirms how the protection and efficient use of water resources play a key role for the future of our environment.
Today is a very important day for us, Aguas de Gaia, and